Welcome, dear traveller, to a quiet corner of the world where time itself seems to slow its weary pace. Settle yourself into your softest blanket, let your shoulders sink, and allow your breathing to drift into a slow, gentle rhythm, like the whisper of warm desert wind moving across pale sandstone. Tonight, we are wandering far away from the noise of the modern hour, drifting into the rose-tinted hush of an ancient kingdom, carved patiently into living rock. Imagine a narrow canyon, its towering walls glowing softly in the last amber light of day, the stones striped with rivers of cinnamon, ochre, and dusty rose. The air is warm but kind, perfumed faintly with sun-warmed dust, wild oleander, and the dry sweetness of distant juniper. Your sandals make the gentlest shuffling sound upon the smooth, worn pathway, and somewhere far ahead a flute plays a slow, lingering melody that floats upon the cooling evening breeze. There is no hurry here. There is no danger to fear. There is only the long, slow exhale of a city that has been resting, dreaming, for nearly 2,000 years. As we walk together through this hidden valley of stone, you may feel your eyelids growing pleasantly heavy, your thoughts beginning to soften and unspool. Let them go. Let yourself drift gently into the deepening twilight of ancient Petra, the rose-red city carved by patient hands, half as old as time itself, where every shadow holds a quiet story waiting kindly for your dreams. Before we step further into the embrace of this sleeping wonder, pause for a single slow breath and let the silence of the canyon settle softly around your heart. If the gentle cadence of this voice has begun to calm the busy current of your thoughts, you may wish to linger here a little longer in this quiet sanctuary of forgotten cities and gentle wandering. Beneath this very passage, there rests a small glowing button, much like a tiny lantern hidden in the corner of an old stone wall. Quiet press upon that small lantern, the one marked with the word subscribe, will keep our path lit for many evenings to come, allowing me to guide you night after night through palaces draped in starlight, through scented gardens of vanished empires, through libraries whose pages have long turned to dust. There is no urgency, no demand, only an open door, left gently ajar for whenever your weary mind seeks refuge. And should you feel the warmth of this story spreading slowly behind your eyes, a soft tap upon the little heart will let me know that you have arrived safely in this hidden valley with me, that you have heard the desert wind, that you have tasted the honeyed silence of twilight. Now, dear listener, breathe in once again, slow and full, and breathe out the weight of your day, as we step together past the final narrow turning of the canyon into the rose-gold heart of Petra herself. We step now beyond the threshold of memory, our feet finding the ancient pathway as it begins its slow, winding descent into the very heart of the canyon. The walls of the Sikh rise on either side of us, towering hundreds of feet above our quiet heads, narrow as the corridor of some old forgotten cathedral, sometimes only wide enough for two camels to pass gently abreast. The sandstone here seems alive with colour in this hour of fading sun, a soft tapestry of warm hues that appear to breathe with the day's last light. Pale apricot blends into deep terracotta, which melts in turn into a rich, dreamy burgundy, where the iron within the stone has wept its slow mineral tears across the long centuries. Ribbons of cream and butter-yellow weave between bands of dusky violet, and where the stone has been worn smooth by 10,000 monsoon rains, it gleams with the gentle sheen of well-loved silk. The path beneath your feet is paved with ancient stones, each one fitted with patient care by Nabatean hands 2,000 years ago. They are worn smooth in their centres, hollowed gently by the passage of countless feet, the bare soles of priests, the sandals of merchants, the soft hooves of donkeys laden with bundles of myrrh and frankincense. You can feel the cool, smooth memory of all those journeys rising softly through the leather of your sandals, a quiet welcome from the stones themselves, as if to say, "You are not the first to walk here, and you will not be the last." Between the paving stones, small green shoots of wild thyme and pale grasses have pushed their way up, releasing a soft herbal sweetness wherever your footstep brushes against them. The air here in the Sikwis is several degrees cooler than the world above, kept gently shaded by the high walls, and it carries upon its slow currents the dry mineral perfume of warm stone, the faint earthy promise of distant water, and a whisper of wood smoke from some unseen fire far ahead. You may notice now, set carefully into the walls of the canyon, the small square niches carved at thoughtful intervals, each one a quiet shrine to a forgotten god. Some still hold the worn outlines of standing stones, bittles the ancients called them, simple rectangular blocks meant to embody the silent presence of the divine. Others hold faint carvings of figures whose features have softened over the centuries until they seem almost to be sleeping, their faces gentled by time into the merest suggestions of cheek and brow. The Nabateans, those clever, patient traders who built this hidden kingdom, did not believe that the gods needed to be shown in elaborate detail. A simple stone, properly placed, properly honored, could hold the fullness of the sacred. There is something deeply restful in that idea. The notion that the holy might dwell in the simplest of forms, in a single block of well-chosen sandstone, in the bend of a quiet path, in the breath you are drawing now. Above us, the canyon walls lean inward in places, almost meeting at the very top, leaving only a thin, jagged ribbon of lavender sky to ripple along the heights. As the day softens further toward evening, that ribbon takes on the color of crushed iris petals, then deepens slowly toward indigo. A pair of swallows wheel through the high gap, their tiny silhouettes black against the fading sky, their distant calls echoing softly down the canyon walls before being absorbed by the patient stone. You can hear, if you listen carefully, the gentle drip of water somewhere ahead, a slow, almost musical sound, as if the canyon itself were keeping time with a quiet inner heartbeat. This is the sound of one of the old Nabatean water channels, those ingenious little ducts cut into the lower walls of the Isy, designed to carry fresh water from distant springs into the heart of the city. Even now, 2,000 years later, in places where the stone has not crumbled, you can still see the soft groove of the channel running along the wall like a long faded ribbon, a reminder that the people who built this place understood the precious, sleepy weight of water in a desert land. The light grows gentler still, the sun having long since dropped below the canyon rim, and the world here is now lit only by the deep amber glow that the warm stones release back into the air, as though the rocks themselves had drunk the daylight and were now slowly, generously breathing it out again. Your hand reaches almost without thought to brush the wall beside you, and the sandstone beneath your fingertips is still surprisingly warm, a comforting low warmth like the side of a sleeping animal, dry and slightly grainy, faintly powdery where the surface has begun to weather. Tiny grains of red sand cling to your fingertips when you draw your hand away, glittering faintly with the mica buried within them, each one a fragment of some ancient mountain that wore itself down across a million quiet seasons to become this very wall, this very moment, this very breath. The path begins to bend now, curving slowly to the left, and as you follow its gentle turning, you find that the Sikh has narrowed even further, its walls drawing intimately closer, until you might almost stretch out your arms and brush both sides at once. There is no fear in this closeness, only a deep, sheltering hush, the feeling of being held within something far older and far more patient than yourself. The sounds of the world above are entirely gone now. There are no cartwheels, no distant voices, no calls of vendors or shepherds. There is only the soft padding of your own footsteps, the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breath, and the hushed, watchful presence of the canyon walls, leaning gently in upon you like the loving curve of a parent's shoulders bending over a sleeping child. A scent begins to drift upon the cooling air, something sweet and mysterious, perhaps a whisper of incense burning somewhere in the city ahead, or perhaps the natural perfume of the desert thyme and wild caper plants that grow in the tiny crevices of the upper rocks. It mingles softly with the smell of the warm stone itself, that dry, golden scent that has no proper name in any language. The smell of patient places, of long memory, of things that have been waiting peacefully for a very long while. You walk on, slowly, your feet finding their own rhythm now, and you begin to notice that the curve of the path is straightening once again, that there is a softer light spilling from somewhere just ahead, a wash of warm rose gold that seems to glow more brightly than any lantern could. Your steps slow, almost without your knowing, and a quiet anticipation settles gently in your chest, the kind of feeling one has just before turning the page of a beloved old story to a passage one has been waiting all evening to read again. The path narrows for one last patient moment, the canyon walls drawing in close as if the stone itself wishes to keep its secret a heartbeat longer. And then, with the gentlest turning of your head, the world before you opens. Through the slim, vertical slot where the sick finally surrenders to the wider valley beyond, there appears a vision so soft, so unexpected in its quiet majesty, that the breath in your chest seems to pause of its own accord. Framed perfectly between the dark walls of the canyon, lit by the last warm honey of the falling sun, stands the great facade of Al-Khazneh, the Treasury, glowing as if carved from a single enormous rose petal pressed against the cliff. You step forward, slowly, and with each pace the great monument reveals itself a little more, until at last you stand within the small hushed plaza before it, and the stone giant rises full and complete before your wondering eyes. It is taller than you imagined. This rose-pink palace in the cliff, soaring more than 40 meters into the deepening sky, almost the height of a 13-story building, yet somehow it does not feel imposing. There is a softness to its proportions, a gentle balance that seems to invite the eye upward in slow, restful steps. The lower level greets you first, a graceful row of 6 tall columns, each one fluted with delicate vertical grooves, their capitals carved into elegant Corinthian crowns of stone acanthus leaves. Between them stretches a wide, welcoming porch, its ceiling once painted in rich ochre and indigo, though those bright colours have long since faded into the warm, dreamy pink of the bare sandstone. Above this lower colonnade rises a second level, more elaborate still, with a circular pavilion at its centre, crowned by a graceful conical roof topped with a great stone urn, and flanked on either side by half pediments that reach toward the sky like the outspread arms of a gentle dancer. Carved into the niches of this upper level are figures so worn by time that they seem almost to be made of softened cloud rather than stone. There you see the slender form of a goddess, her draperies falling in long flowing folds that hint at the curve of a knee, the gentle bend of a shoulder. There a winged Victory stretches her arms outward in eternal welcome, her face long since smoothed away by patient centuries of wind, leaving only the softest suggestion of a serene expression. Eagles perch above the columns, their feathers reduced to faint patterns of texture, their watchful eyes hollowed into kind, sleepy shadows. Every detail seems softened, gentled, as if the long years had been a careful sculptor, polishing away every harsh edge until the entire monument breathed with the quiet calm of something dreaming. The stone itself is a wonder beyond all the carving. In the warm light of these closing minutes of the day, the facade glows with a colour that no painter has ever quite been able to capture upon canvas. It is the colour of a peach held against candlelight, the colour of the inside of a seashell, the colour of a desert rose at the moment of its fullest opening. Streaks of darker burgundy ripple through the pale rose like the shadowed veins of a living petal, and where moisture has slowly worked its way down across the centuries, soft ribbons of cream and pale gold trace their patient paths down the carved columns. As the sun lowers further behind the western cliffs, the colour seems to deepen, to grow richer, more saturated, as though the stone were a great vessel slowly filling with the wine of evening. Shadows lengthen gently across the carved capitals, and the deep alcoves of the upper level grow soft and mysterious, holding pools of cool violet shade. You take a step closer, and the broad plaza beneath your feet is paved with ancient flagstones, worn into a smooth, polished surface by the passing of innumerable feet across millennia. Here merchants once unloaded camels heavy with frankincense from southern Arabia, with myrrh from the kingdom of Saba, with silks from distant lands beyond the great deserts. Here pilgrims came in slow procession to lay offerings at the threshold of what they believed to be a great temple. Here perhaps a young Nabatean prince once stood as you stand now, gazing upward in quiet wonder at the work of his ancestors, his small hand held within the larger hand of his father. The flagstones still hold the warmth of the day, and as you place your palm flat upon one of them, You feel the gentle golden heat soaking softly into your skin, a friendly warmth like the warmth of fresh-baked bread wrapped in a clean linen cloth. The carved doorway at the heart of the lower colonnade draws your eye now, a tall, dark rectangle of cool shadow set into the rose-pink stone. It is wider than three men standing shoulder to shoulder, taller than the height of a tall horse and rider together, and from its dim interior drifts a subtle mineral coolness, the patient breath of stone untouched by sun. You walk slowly toward this opening, your sandals making soft padding sounds against the flagstones, and as you cross the threshold, the warmth of the outer world gives way to a gentle, refreshing cool like stepping into the shade of an ancient olive grove on a summer afternoon. The air within is clean and dry, scented faintly with the dust of patient ages, with the trace memory of incense burnt long, long ago. The chamber inside is simpler than you might have expected. A single great square room, its walls smooth, its ceiling lifted high above your head into a soft pyramidal vault. There are no decorations here, no carvings, no painted scenes, only the bare, breathing stone glowing faintly pink, even in this dim interior, lit by the slanting amber light that spills in through the doorway behind you. 3 smaller alcoves open from the central chamber, each one a quiet, restful space. Perhaps once used to hold offerings, perhaps once used to shelter the relics of some long-forgotten king. The floor beneath your feet is cool and even, and the silence within is so complete that you can hear the soft sound of your own breath, can feel your heartbeat slowing to match the patient pulse of the stone around you. For a long, peaceful moment, you simply stand there in the deepening hush, allowing the gentle coolness to wrap around you like a soft, silken cloak. The light from the doorway grows slowly more golden, more amber, more deeply rose-tinted as the sun continues its long, slow descent beyond the canyon rim. The shadows of the columns outside stretch longer and softer across the plaza, and the great facade of the Treasury, when you turn to look back through the open doorway, seems to glow now from within, as if the stone itself were quietly luminous, if it had been holding the gathered light of the entire long afternoon and were now releasing it back into the world in one slow, generous, golden exhalation. You stand at the threshold between the cool inner chamber and the warm outer plaza, suspended for a single perfect moment in the soft hush of the slowly closing day. Stepping softly out from the cool embrace of the Treasury's inner chamber, you allow your steps to carry you gently onward past the broad plaza into the wider valley that opens before you like a great stone amphitheatre carved by the slow patience of forgotten ages. The path here turns to follow the eastern face of a long rising cliff, and as you walk, the entire wall of red stone reveals itself, mile upon mile of layered sandstone, its surface shaped not by the wind alone but by the patient chisels of ancient masons who carved into it a great chorus of tombs, facades, and chambers, each one a quiet monument to a king or noble whose name has long since softened into the warm dust of memory. The most magnificent of these tombs rise just ahead, a row of 4 great facades known to scholars as the royal tombs, though their true names and the kings they honoured have been lost across the long sleeping centuries. They stand together in a stately hushed line, each one different from the others, each one telling its own quiet story in the soft language of carved stone. The first to greet you is the urn tomb, raised upon a tall platform that sets it above the level of the valley floor, reached by a wide stone staircase whose steps are worn into smooth, gentle hollows. Above its great doorway stands a single carved urn, the source of its modern name set against the deepening sky like a lantern that has long since gone to sleep. The columns of its facade are tall and slender, their capitals worn into soft, rounded forms, and behind them stretches a deep porch where the air feels several degrees cooler, a quiet pool of shade lifted up above the plain below. You climb those wide stone steps, slowly, and at the top you turn for a moment to look back across the valley. The view from this small lifted plaza is one of the most peaceful you have ever seen. Below you spreads the great open heart of Petra, the colonnaded street stretching like a soft golden ribbon between the cliffs, the ruins of temples and houses scattered amongst the pale, dusty grasses of the valley floor, the distant western hills glowing pink and lavender with the last of the day's colour. Far away, you can see the small dark shapes of figures moving slowly along the paths, their long shadows stretching far behind them in the slanting light. The air carries the soft sound of distant goat bells, a slow, irregular chiming, and somewhere closer, the soft cooing of a desert dove hidden among the rocks above. Turning back to the tomb itself, you step into its great interior, and here the chamber opens far wider than that of the Treasury, an enormous vaulted hall hewn directly from the heart of the cliff. The ceiling lifts high above your head, and the walls bear the soft, swirling patterns of the layered sandstone, ribbons of colour flowing through the stone like the slow currents of an underground river, caught and frozen in a single perfect moment. Here the colours deepen further still, with rich plums and cinnamons and dusky golds spiralling across the walls in patterns no human hand could ever have designed. The floor is cool beneath your feet, smooth as a polished riverbed, and 3 deep alcoves open in the rear wall, where once perhaps the sarcophagi of some great Nabatean king and his family rested in eternal stillness. The hall is empty now, of course, swept clean by centuries of patient wind, and the silence within is so deep and so soft that it seems almost to have a texture, a velvety quality that brushes against your ears like the wing of a moth. Stepping back outside, you continue along the cliff to the next of the royal tombs, the Silk Tomb, named for the extraordinary patterns that flow across its facade. Here the layered sandstone reaches its most magnificent expression, with bands of colour so vivid and so fluid that the entire face of the tomb appears to be draped in folds of luminous silk. Crimson flows into amber, amber into ivory, ivory into deep wine purple, and where the bands of colour meet, they swirl into delicate marbled patterns that seem to shift and dance in the changing light of evening. The carved facade itself is simpler than the others, less elaborate in its architectural details, as if the ancient builders understood that the natural beauty of the stone here needed no embellishment from human hands, that the rock itself was the masterwork. The third tomb in the row is the Corinthian tomb, more weathered now than its companions, its facade softened by long centuries of patient wind, until many of its details have melted into gentle suggestions. You can still see, however, the elegant pattern of its carved columns, the broken pediment above its central doorway, the suggestion of a small circular pavilion rising from its upper level. There is a particular tenderness to this softened facade, a sense of something beloved gradually being absorbed back into the embrace of the living rock from which it was first drawn. The wind, that patient sculptor, has been working here for 2,000 years, smoothing and gentling, and the result is not destruction but a different kind of beauty, the beauty of softening, of returning, of slow forgiveness. Last in the row stands the palace tomb, the largest and most elaborate of the 4, its facade rising in 3 distinct levels carved with a long row of arched recesses, columns and pediments. It is an extraordinary work, modelled perhaps upon the great palaces of distant Rome or Alexandria, and it speaks of a Nabatean kingdom that knew itself to be wealthy beyond measure, connected by the long caravan routes to the grandest civilizations of the ancient world. Yet even this most ambitious of tombs has been gentled by time, its sharp architectural lines softened, its carved figures worn into peaceful, drowsy forms. As the last light of the sun catches its highest cornice, the entire facade seems briefly to blaze with the warm colour of a great rose held against a candle. And then, as the sun sinks just a little further, the blaze gives way to a softer, deeper glow, the colour of warm copper at the bottom of an old kettle. You stand for a long, restful moment before this gallery of tombs, this slow line of carved monuments that march along the eastern cliff like a quiet procession of sleeping kings. There is no sadness here, no heaviness of grief, only a deep, peaceful sense of presence, a feeling that those long-vanished royal souls are not gone, but only resting, only dreaming somewhere just beneath the surface of the warm stone. Above the cliff, the sky has begun to deepen into rich tones of violet and dusty rose, and the first faint stars are just beginning to glimmer faintly in the eastern heights. Soft breeze moves down the valley, carrying with it the scent of cooling stone, of distant cook fires, of the dry, sweet herbs that grow in the cracks of the high rocks. You draw it slowly into your lungs, and you feel yourself growing more peaceful still, more deeply rooted in this gentle hour, as the great rose-pink tombs glow their soft eternal welcome above you. Leaving behind the long line of the royal tombs, your gentle path now descends from the eastern cliffs and brings you down into the wide level heart of the valley, where once the bustling life of Petra flowed in its daily currents from dawn until dusk. The great colonnaded street stretches before you, a broad ceremonial avenue paved in massive stone slabs, running for nearly a quarter of a mile through the very centre of the ancient city. Course bordered on either side by the worn stumps of marble and sandstone columns that once supported tall, shaded porticos, even in this twilight hour, with most of those grand columns long since fallen and only a portion restored, you can feel the patient ghost of the boulevard's former grandeur, a quiet majesty that needs no embellishment to make itself known. The paving stones here are extraordinary in their craftsmanship, each great slab cut with such precision that the joints between them are barely the width of a single fingernail, fitted together so closely that not even a single grain of desert sand can find its way between. Some of the stones bear the faint polished tracks where the wheels of ancient chariots and ox carts wore shallow grooves into the surface, the ghostly memory of countless journeys of merchants returning from the great caravan routes, of priests processing in slow ceremony toward the temples at the western end of the street, of children running on bare feet between the legs of their elders. As you walk slowly along these stones, you can feel beneath your soles the cool, smooth weight of all that vanished life, and the warmth of the day's last sun is still held within them, rising softly through the leather of your sandals like a gentle, friendly greeting from below. To your right stretches the line of the southern colonnade, where the slender columns rise at regular intervals from their stone bases. Some of these columns still stand to their full original height, lifting tall and graceful into the deepening sky, their fluted shafts catching the last warm light of the sun and glowing with the colour of warm honey. Others have been reduced by the long centuries to mere stumps, their broken tops gentled by wind and rain into soft, rounded forms that look almost like the heads of sleeping creatures emerging from the earth. At the base of each column, you can see the ancient stone bases, carved in simple, elegant patterns of mouldings and ridges, their lower edges softened by the slow accumulation of valley dust until they seem to rise organically from the ground itself, as natural as the trunks of old olive trees. Behind the line of columns once stood a long, shaded portico, a sheltered walkway where merchants set up their small stalls in the shade of the colonnade. You can imagine, with the gentlest closing of your eyes, the busy life that once filled this space, the soft murmur of voices in many languages, the clink of small bronze coins changing hands, the low, patient calls of camels resting in the shade with their long-lashed eyes half closed. There would have been the heady scent of exotic spices laid out upon woven mats, mountains of saffron the colour of fire, dunes of cinnamon bark, small pyramids of black peppercorns from the distant Indian shores, golden powders of turmeric and ginger and cardamom. There would have been bolts of silk laid out for inspection, gleaming with colours that no other land could produce, deep crimsons and brilliant azures and the elusive pearl pink of the finest cocoons. There would have been small delicate bottles of glass crafted in the workshops of Sidon and Tyre, holding precious oils and perfumes whose scents could carry one's thoughts to gardens that bloomed in lands one would never see. Across the broad street, the northern side of the avenue was lined with similar colonnades and shops, and beyond them rose the great public buildings of Petra, the marketplaces and the bath complexes, the administrative halls where the affairs of the kingdom were conducted in the soft, flowing script of Nabatean Aramaic. Gymnasium once stood there, a pool complex, gardens watered by the ingenious channels that brought spring water from the high places into the heart of the city. Now most of these buildings are reduced to gentle outlines in the dust, their walls lowered to knee-height by the patient work of time. But if you turn slowly in place and let your eyes follow the soft contours of those ruined foundations, you can almost see them rising again in the warm light of memory, their roofs covered in red clay tiles, their walls washed in pale lime, their inner courts cool with the murmur of small fountains. At the western end of the colonnaded street, just where the great avenue rises gently toward the temple precinct, stands the magnificent Temenos Gate, or what remains of it, a great triple archway that once marked the entrance to the most sacred precincts of the city. Its central arch is a soaring, graceful curve of carefully fitted stones, flanked on either side by smaller arches, and its piers are decorated with carved pilasters and elegant mouldings that even now, after so many centuries, retain their delicate detail. As you pass beneath the central arch, you can look up and see the finely cut keystone carved with a small flower, perhaps a rose, perhaps a lotus, its petals worn into the softest suggestion of their original form. The shadow beneath the arch is cool and welcoming, and you pause for a moment within its embrace, feeling the patient stone above you holding back the sky. Beyond the gate rises the great Qasr al-Bint, the temple of the goddess, the most important of all the religious buildings in Petra. Even in its ruined state, it is a structure of profound beauty, rising in a great rectangular form of warm sandstone, its walls lifting 40 feet into the sky, capped with the worn stumps of what were once magnificent capitals. The temple was dedicated to the great Nabatean goddess Al-Uzza, sister of dawn and patron of the morning star, and within its sacred precinct stood her image, a simple block of carved stone, decorated only with the merest suggestion of her watchful eyes. For the Nabateans believed that the holy did not need elaborate forms to make itself known. As you approach the temple, you feel the air growing somehow stiller, more attentive, as if the long centuries of devotion that once flowed through these walls have left a subtle, lasting impression upon the very atmosphere itself. The light has now softened nearly to the colour of a pale, late peach, and shadows have grown long and gentle across the broad expanse of the valley floor. Small bats have begun to emerge from the high crevices of the surrounding cliffs, fluttering in their soft, irregular patterns against the deepening sky. The air is cooler now, sweet with the subtle perfume of evening, and the great length of the colonnaded street stretches behind you and before you like a long, peaceful passage through the very centre of a sleeping dream. Each footfall feels lighter, slower, more in tune with the patient rhythm of the ancient stones, and your breath has settled into a slow, soft cadence that seems to match the gentle pulse of the city itself, dreaming all around you in the rose-gold light of its endless twilight. Narrow stairway draws you now away from the central valley, rising gently from the western edge of the city into the folds of the surrounding mountains, where a higher and more distant marvel awaits the patient traveller. The path begins as a gentle slope, paved with the same warm sandstone as the city below, then gradually steepens into a long staircase carved directly into the living rock of the mountain itself. There are some 800 steps in all, climbing in slow, generous flights up through the high ravines. But you need not feel any hurry, for the climb is meant to be taken at the pace of slow contemplation, with frequent pauses to admire the views that reveal themselves at every turning. The stairs are wide and uneven, worn into soft hollows by the passage of pilgrim feet across 2,000 years, and small wild flowers grow in the cracks at the edges, tiny white blossoms and soft yellow ones that release their delicate perfumes whenever your sandal brushes near. As you climb, the world opens slowly around you. The cliffs that seemed so vast from the valley floor below now appear in their full majestic context, layer upon layer of red and gold sandstone, reaching toward the deepening sky, sculpted by wind into shapes that suggest cathedrals and dreaming faces and the slow folds of enormous draperies. Far below, the great valley of Petra grows smaller, the colonnaded street becoming a thin golden line. The rooftops of the lower buildings reduced to scattered patches of darker shadow against the pale sand. Goats with rust-coloured coats appear here and there along the higher ledges, their bells chiming softly as they pick their way among the rocks, their small bright eyes watching your slow progress with peaceful indifference. They have lived among these stones for many generations, the descendants of the goats that the ancient Nabateans once kept, and they belong to this landscape as completely as the wild flowers and the wheeling swallows. Halfway up the long staircase, the path passes through a narrow defile where the stone walls press in close on either side, then opens into a small sheltered hollow where a tiny shrine has been carved into the rock. There is a worn stone niche here, an offering shelf, and a small spring trickles softly from a crack in the wall, its water collected in a hollowed basin beneath. You may pause here if you wish, and dip your fingers into the cool, clear water and feel its quiet aliveness against your skin. The water tastes faintly of mineral, of patient stone, and it carries a coolness that travels gently through your hand and up your arm, refreshing you for the climb ahead. Above the basin, ancient travelers have left their small marks upon the stone, names worn nearly to invisibility, simple geometric patterns, the occasional carved hand or eye, the silent record of countless pilgrims who have paused here, just as you pause now to gather their breath before continuing upward. The path resumes its gentle climbing, and as you ascend you become aware of the changing quality of the air. It grows clearer here, thinner, sweeter, with the dry, crystalline freshness that belongs only to the high places. The wind moves more freely, brushing softly against your skin, carrying upon its currents the perfume of the wild juniper trees that grow in the higher ravines, a sharp, resinous fragrance that mingles with the warm scent of sun-baked stone. The light, too, has changed, growing more golden, more direct. For you are now climbing back into the last reach of the sun, which has not yet entirely abandoned the high country, even as the lower valley begins to fill with the violet pools of evening shadow. The cliffs around you blaze with a deep, rich amber, and your own long shadow stretches behind you upon the staircase, swaying gently with each step you take. After many slow, peaceful turnings, the path arrives at last upon a wide, flat plateau, and there, before your wondering eyes, rises one of the most magnificent monuments in all of Petra, the great facade known as Ad-Dair, the monastery. It is even larger than the treasury below, fully 50 meters wide and 45 meters tall, an enormous mountain of carved stone whose surface seems almost to glow in the warm light of the late sun. Yet, despite its enormous scale, the monastery feels somehow more simple, more ancient, more elemental than the treasury, as though it had been carved not by ambition, but by a deep, patient devotion. Its architecture is broader, more austere, with massive columns flanking its lower level, a great central doorway leading into a single vast chamber, and an upper level dominated by an enormous circular pavilion crowned with a great stone urn that catches the last sunlight like a beacon held high above the world. You approach the great facade slowly, and as you draw nearer, you appreciate the patient grandeur of its proportions. The lower columns are wider than the trunks of 3 great oaks set together, their fluted surfaces deeply shadowed in this late hour. The doorway between them is enormous, taller than 5 tall men set one upon the shoulders of another, and the chamber within breathes out a deep, cathedral coolness that draws you gently across its threshold. Inside, the great hall opens around you in a single magnificent space, its ceiling lifting high above into a soft pyramidal vault, its walls bare and pure, the warm pink stone glowing faintly in the diffuse light. There is a small platform at the rear of the chamber where, in the early Christian centuries that followed the Nabatean kingdom, a simple altar once stood. For monks chose this remote and beautiful place as a refuge for their quiet contemplations, giving the monument its modern name. Stepping back outside, you walk a small distance further along the plateau to where the rocks fall away in a sheer drop toward the distant lands beyond Petra. Here, at the edge of the high country, you may sit upon a flat stone warmed by the long day's sun and gaze out across one of the most peaceful views in all the world. The land beyond stretches westward in great rolling waves of pale stone and dusky scrubland, fading into the soft blue distance of the Wadi Araba, beyond which on the clearest of evenings you might glimpse the faraway gleam of the Dead Sea, lying like a sheet of polished pewter in its low valley. To the south, the mountains roll away in slow, gentle ridges, each one a slightly paler shade of dusty rose than the one before it, until they fade into the soft, dreamy blue of the deepest distance. The sky above you has begun its slow transition into evening, the high blue softening into pale lavender, and at the western horizon a great glow of golden orange spreads across the whole sky, lighting the underside of a few thin clouds with the colour of beaten copper and warm amber. The first stars are now appearing, faint and tender, in the deepening east, and the entire plateau seems to hold its breath in the deep, peaceful hush of the closing day. The monastery behind you glows in the warm, reflected light, and a soft wind moves across the high places, carrying upon its slow currents the resinous sweetness of juniper and the ancient memory of 2,000 years of evening hours just like this one. You feel yourself settling deeper into the soft embrace of the moment, your breath slowing, your heart growing peaceful as the sleeping giant of the mountain holds its long, restful watch over the dreaming city below. The high places must be left behind for now, and your gentle descent carries you back into the warm heart of the lower city, where a different kind of beauty awaits. The light has settled into its deep amber phase, that magical hour when the day has not yet released its hold upon the sky, but has surrendered the foreground to the soft creeping of shadow. You walk now along a side avenue branching from the great colonnaded street into a quieter quarter where, in the days of Petra's flourishing, the great market districts once spread their busy nets of commerce. Even in their ruined state, the outlines of these old marketplaces can still be traced beneath your feet, their shop fronts marked by low stone thresholds, their inner courts paved in worn flagstones, their narrow lanes following the patient logic of vanished daily life. It is easy, in this hour of soft and forgiving light, to imagine the marketplace as it once was. Picture, if you will, a long open courtyard surrounded by a low wall of dressed sandstone, its perimeter lined with small vaulted shops opening directly onto the central space. The shops are little more than deep, cool alcoves carved into the stone, each with a stone counter at its front where the merchant displays his wares, and a small storeroom behind where his stock is kept in cool darkness. Above each alcove a short awning of woven goat hair stretches outward to provide shade against the strong noon sun, though now in this gentle evening hour the awnings are being slowly rolled and tied as the day's trade winds down toward its peaceful close. The scents here are extraordinary, a slow layered tapestry of fragrances that mingles into something far more complex than any single perfume could achieve. Closest to where you stand, a spice merchant has been at his wares all day, and the air around his shop is rich with the warm golden perfume of saffron, the deep earthen sweetness of cumin, the sharp citrus brightness of fresh coriander seed, the dusky honey of cardamom. He is gathering his small mountains of coloured powders into clean linen bags, tying them carefully with lengths of red cord, his hands stained orange and gold from his patient work. Few paces beyond his stall, an old woman sits beside her small pyramid of dried figs, their dark sweetness adding a quiet, mellow note to the perfume of the marketplace, and beside her, baskets of dried apricots glow in the late light like small heaps of captured sunset. Across the central court, a different fragrance entirely drifts from the workshop of an incense merchant. Here the scents are of frankincense and myrrh, the precious resins that have made Petra wealthy beyond imagining, brought up from the southern Arabian shores by long caravan routes, and traded onward to the great cities of Rome and Alexandria. The frankincense smells of warm pine and cool lemon, and something deeper still, a woody sweetness that seems almost to ring like a soft, distant bell within your senses. The myrrh is darker, more melancholy, a perfume of bitter herbs and old churches and the gentle solemnity of remembered prayers. Small chunks of these resins lie heaped upon dark cloths within the merchant's shop, gleaming faintly amber and gold and deep red-brown in the late light, and the merchant himself, an old man with a long silver beard, carefully wrapping a small parcel of his finest grade for a customer who has come to make a final purchase before the close of trade. The customer is a tall woman draped in a long robe of indigo wool, her head covered by a soft veil edged with embroidered silver thread. She speaks to the merchant in a low, melodious voice, in the soft, flowing tones of Nabatean Aramaic, that gentle Semitic language that flowed through the valleys of Petra for many centuries. You cannot understand her words, but the music of them is somehow soothing, a soft cascade of liquid syllables full of breath and warmth. She presses a small handful of silver drachmae into the merchant's palm, and he weighs them quietly in his hand, nodding in satisfaction, before sealing her parcel with a small dab of warm beeswax pressed with his personal mark. As you wander further through the slowly emptying marketplace, you find a stall where a young man sells beautiful pottery, the famous Nabatean ware whose delicate eggshell-thin walls and exquisite painted patterns are admired throughout the ancient world. The pots are arranged in careful rows upon a long table covered with woven matting, Some are small drinking cups no larger than the bowl of your palm, painted with patterns of stylized leaves and flowing vines in soft red and ochre upon their pale cream surfaces. Others are larger jugs and bowls decorated with geometric patterns of remarkable complexity, with bands of small triangles and diamonds and softly curving scrolls that flow around their bellies in patient hypnotic rhythms. The young potter himself sits cross-legged upon a low cushion behind his table, gently buffing one of his finer pieces with a soft cloth, his concentration so complete that he barely notices your slow passing. Few stalls further along, the sweet scent of fresh bread drifts upon the cooling air, drawing you toward a small open-air bakery where the last of the day's loaves are being sold. The baker has a small stone oven set into the wall behind him, its door now mostly closed but still releasing a soft, warm breath of yeasted air whenever he reaches inside to retrieve another loaf. The breads are simple and beautiful, round, flat loaves about the width of two outstretched hands, marked with the gentle imprint of his fingers along their tops, their crusts the colour of warm copper, their bottoms slightly dusted with the fine wood ash of his oven. He has perhaps a dozen loaves left, and he calls out softly to passing customers in a low, friendly voice, encouraging them to take the last of his work before he closes for the evening. You can almost taste the warm bread from where you stand. The soft give of its crumb, the slight tang of its sourdough, the smoky earthen sweetness of its crust. Near the far end of the marketplace, a small group of travellers has gathered around a fountain where they are watering their camels and pack donkeys at the close of their long day's journey. The animals lower their gentle heads to drink, their soft lips dipping into the cool water, and the sound of their slow drinking is one of the most peaceful in all the world, a soft, rhythmic plashing that seems to slow the very pulse of time. The camels are tall and patient, with long, curling eyelashes and soft brown coats grown thick from their journeys through the high passes, and they carry the dust of distant lands upon their humps and saddles. Their owners, weary travellers in long, dusty robes, lean against the cool stone of the fountain wall and speak in low voices about the road ahead, about the price of grain, about the news from distant cities, their words drifting softly through the warm twilight air. The shadows of the marketplace are growing longer now, deeper, more violet in their hue, and lamps are beginning to be lit here and there in the doorways of the closing shops. The small flames of the oil lamps glow with a soft, warm yellow, casting gentle pools of light upon the worn flagstones, and a slow, peaceful music seems to settle over the entire marketplace as the day's commerce gives way at last to the soft, patient quiet of evening rest. To understand Petra in her deepest, most living essence, one must turn one's gentle attention towards something most travellers fail entirely to notice, something that runs quietly beneath the very stones upon which they walk, something that whispers softly in the channels carved into the canyon walls. One must turn in this peaceful hour of fading light to consider the patient, ingenious art of water, the great, slow miracle that allowed an entire kingdom to flourish in the midst of one of the driest landscapes upon the earth. For Petra was against all expectation a city of water, a city woven about and within and beneath by an intricate, beautiful system of channels and cisterns and reservoirs that captured every precious drop of rain, every bright trickle of mountain spring, and held it tenderly until it might be needed in the long, dry months of summer. Walk now slowly along the base of the canyon wall just at the edge of the city, and let your fingers trail gently along the smooth surface of the rock. There, just at the height of your shoulder, you may feel the subtle carved groove running horizontally along the stone, a soft, even channel about as deep as the length of your finger, cut with extraordinary care, so that its slope descends at the exact gentle angle required to keep the water flowing evenly along its course. This is one of the great network of water channels that the Nabatean engineers carved into the very walls of their canyons. Channels that brought water from the springs in the high country down into the heart of the city across great distances, sometimes for many miles, with such precise gradient that the water never moved too quickly to be lost, never moved so slowly that it stagnated. The channel in some places is open to the sky, where you can still see on certain wet seasons the slow movement of clear water along its smooth bed. In other places, it has been covered over with carefully fitted stones to keep the water cool and clean as it flows, to prevent the slow accumulation of dust and leaves, to protect it from the heat of the summer sun. The covered sections are betrayed only by a slightly raised line of careful stonework along the wall, and by the cooler temperature of the air that lingers near them. For water that has flowed through cool stone all day brings with it a quiet, refreshing chill that you can feel on your skin even from a small distance. Where the channels reach the city itself, they pour their precious cargo into great cisterns carved deep into the bedrock, vast underground chambers whose ceilings are supported by patient pillars of living stone, tanned, whose walls are lined with a special hydraulic plaster that the Nabateans developed and perfected, a smooth, polished surface that prevented the water from seeping out into the surrounding rock. The largest of these cisterns could hold tens of thousands of cubic feet of water, enough to sustain a sizable population through many months of drought, and the smaller, private cisterns built beneath the homes of wealthy citizens might hold supply enough for a family and its servants throughout the long, dry summer. You may, with the gentlest closing of your eyes, imagine descending the worn stone staircase that leads down into one of these great cisterns, your sandals making soft padding sounds upon the cool steps. The air grows immediately cooler as you descend, with the deep mineral chill of underground places, and the sounds of the world above fade into a soft, distant murmur. At the bottom of the staircase, the chamber opens around you in a vast space of quiet darkness, lit only by the small golden flame of the oil lamp you carry in your hand. The water lies before you in a great still pool, its surface so motionless that it seems almost solid, reflecting back the faint light of your lamp in a single slow golden gleam. The walls of the cistern rise high above you, their surfaces gleaming faintly with the polished hydraulic plaster, and the silence within is so deep and so welcoming that you can hear the soft sound of your own breathing as it flows in and out of your peaceful lungs. You might dip your fingers into the cool water of the cistern and feel its sweet mineral chill traveling gently up your arm. The water tastes faintly of the high mountain springs that gave it birth, of the patient stones through which it has flowed, of the long dark months of waiting in the cool darkness. It is the water that has sustained the city of Petra for centuries, the water that has made possible everything that you have seen this evening, the rose-pink temples and the colonnaded streets and the patient gardens watered in the courtyards of the wealthy, the small herb pots and the cool drinking fountains and the great public baths where the merchants of many lands washed away the dust of their long journeys. For the Nabateans were not merely the storers of water, they were also its careful directors, its skilled choreographers. Throughout the city, they laid down a network of smaller channels and pipes that carried water from the great cisterns to the public fountains, to the bath complexes, to the temple precincts, to the fine private homes of the wealthy. The pipes were made of carefully fired clay, fitted together with such precision that water could flow through them under pressure, allowing for fountains that played in the warm air, allowing for baths that ran with steady, generous streams. In some of the finer homes, water flowed through the walls themselves in narrow channels, providing a cool, refreshing breeze in the hottest months of the year, kind of ancient air conditioning that kept the inner rooms tender and comfortable, even when the sun blazed mercilessly upon the outer walls. Outside the city, in the surrounding hills and the long approach valley, the Nabateans had also built a great series of dams, small barriers of carefully fitted stone that crossed the narrow valleys at strategic points, holding back the brief, powerful floods of the rainy season and forcing the water to rest, to settle, to release its sediment, before flowing onward more peacefully into the city. These dams were ingenious works of engineering, built without mortar in many cases, simply through the patient, perfect fitting of stones that locked one against another by the simple genius of their shapes. Some of these ancient dams still stand today, 2,000 years after their construction, their stones still in place, holding back the silent floods of the desert seasons just as they were meant to do. In this slow, peaceful hour of evening contemplation, with the light fading softly over the stones, it is possible to feel a deep gratitude rising in one's heart for the patient genius of those long-vanished engineers, those quiet souls who understood more deeply perhaps than most modern peoples ever do, the precious, sleepy weight of water in a thirsty land. They built no monuments to themselves. Those engineers, no grand statues, no inscribed pillars proclaiming their names. Their monuments were the channels carved into the canyon walls, the cisterns hidden beneath the stones, the dams that still hold their patient watch in the surrounding hills, and the simple, beautiful fact that for many hundreds of years a great city flourished here in the heart of a desert kingdom, because clever and humble hands had made it possible for water to flow. Let your slow steps draw you now away from the great public spaces of the ancient city, away from the marketplaces and the temples and the long colonnaded avenues, into the smaller, more intimate quarters where the ordinary life of Petra once flowed in its quiet daily rhythms. The houses here are humbler than the great facades carved into the cliffs, smaller than the royal tombs and the grand temples, and yet they speak more softly and more truly of the daily life of the kingdom than any of those grander monuments could ever do. They are tucked into the gentle folds of the lower hills, facing southward to catch the warm winter sun, sheltered from the hot summer winds by the careful placement of their walls and the patient orientation of their courtyards. The home we shall enter together is one such modest dwelling, the home of a respectable family of middle station, perhaps a merchant who deals in textiles, perhaps a skilled craftsman whose hands know the patient art of pottery or metalwork. Its outer wall is built of dressed sandstone blocks fitted together without mortar, the same warm rose pink as the surrounding cliffs, and its low door is made of cedar wood, brought up from the distant Lebanon mountains by the trade routes, polished to a soft golden sheen by the patient touch of many generations of hands. Above the door, a small carved niche holds a single rounded stone, the beetle, the silent dwelling place of the household god, and beside the door, a small ceramic basin holds clean water for the washing of feet before entering, custom of the desert peoples that speaks of hospitality and of respect for the threshold between the outer and inner worlds. You step inside, and the door closes softly behind you, shutting out the last warm light of the deepening twilight. The first space you enter is a small entry court, open to the sky above, paved with smooth flagstones and surrounded by the gentle walls of the house. In the centre of this little court grows a single fig tree, its broad green leaves spreading like soft, generous hands above your head, and beneath its branches sits a small clay water jar with a curved lip, beads of cool moisture gathered upon its surface. The court is quiet and gentle, scented with the warm leafy perfume of the fig tree, and with a subtle, lingering smell of cooking that drifts from the inner rooms. Birds rest in the branches of the tree, small desert sparrows that have made their nests among the leaves, and they offer the soft, drowsy chirpings of their evening conversation. From the entry court, several doorways lead into the inner rooms of the house, each draped with a soft curtain of woven goat hair, to offer privacy and to keep out the dust and the wind. You may part the curtain of the largest doorway and step through into the main room of the dwelling, the great gathering hall where the family takes its meals and receives its guests. This room is rectangular and surprisingly spacious, with a low ceiling supported by simple wooden beams of fragrant cedar, its floor covered with a rich carpet of deep crimson and patient ochre, its walls washed in a soft pale pink that almost glows in the gentle light of the oil lamps. Along the longer walls run low benches built of stone and covered with thick cushions of woven linen and embroidered wool, the cushions in colours of indigo and saffron and the soft silvery green of olive leaves. In the centre of the room stands a small, low table of polished cedar, its surface set with a few simple but beautiful objects, a small bowl of fresh figs, a clay pitcher of cool water, a tiny vessel of dark golden oil. The walls are mostly bare, but here and there a small niche has been carved into the stone to hold a treasured object, a small painted pottery jug, a piece of polished red coral brought up from the southern seas, a tiny carved stone amulet shaped like a sleeping bird. In one corner, a tall, narrow cabinet of dark wood holds the family's collection of fine tableware, small cups and bowls and serving plates of the famous Nabatean eggshell pottery, each piece thinner than seems possible, painted with delicate patterns of vines and flowing leaves. The light in the room is gentle and warm, provided by several small clay oil lamps set in carved niches around the walls. Each lamp is no larger than the bowl of your hand, with a single wick floating in fragrant olive oil, and each one casts a soft golden circle of light upon the surrounding stone. The flames are small and steady, barely flickering, and the air around them carries the warm, mellow scent of burning oil and a subtle herbal sweetness from the small handful of dried thyme that has been added to the lamp oil to perfume the air. The shadows in the room are deep and soft, gathering peacefully in the corners, and the entire space feels like a gentle embrace, a quiet refuge from the larger world outside. You may pass through another curtained doorway into the kitchen, where the day's work is just now winding down toward its peaceful close. The kitchen is a small, busy room with a stone hearth set into one wall where the embers of the cooking fire are now glowing softly, casting a warm orange light upon the woman who stands beside it. She is the mistress of the household, dressed in a long robe of soft, undyed linen with a simple embroidered border, her dark hair pulled back from her face and bound with a length of pale ribbon. She is putting away the last of the evening's preparations, wiping the heavy stone mortar in which she ground the day's spices, hanging a few sprigs of fresh herbs from the small wooden pegs above the hearth. The kitchen smells of all the warm, gentle things that have passed through it during the day, of grain and oil and dried fruit, of slow-roasted lamb, and of the soft sweetness of dates baked in honey. A small clay bowl rests upon the warm stones beside the hearth, holding the remains of the evening meal that the family has just shared. There is a piece of soft, broken flat bread, a few olives in a small dish of golden oil, the last fragrant scoop of a stew made of lentils and onions and fragrant cumin, a tiny cup containing the dregs of a pale sweet wine. The mistress moves with the slow, peaceful rhythm of one who has worked all day and is now coming gently to her rest, and her movements are as quiet and unhurried as the soft drift of the smoke rising from the dying embers of her hearth. In the inner rooms beyond the kitchen, the smaller chambers of the family lie wrapped in their evening quiet. There is a small bedroom for the children, where two little ones now sleep upon thick woven mats, their small faces peaceful in the dim glow of a single oil lamp set high upon a shelf. There is the larger bedroom of the parents, the bed itself a low platform of stone covered with thick woolen mattresses and soft linen sheets, the linens scented faintly with dried lavender, and rose petals tucked into small cloth bags among the folds. Each of these rooms is small and simple and beautiful in its own quiet way, and each of them holds within its gentle walls the soft, sleeping breath of the family that calls this house their home. Let your gentle thoughts now drift outward from the quiet home beyond the walls of the city itself, out into the great patient expanse of the surrounding desert, where, even in this peaceful hour of fading light, the slow, eternal commerce of Petra is still in motion. For Petra was above all else a city of caravans, a great gathering point upon the long roads that knit together the ancient world, a meeting place where the goods of distant lands were exchanged in the soft cadence of negotiation, where the wealth of empires flowed through patient hands, where the perfumes of Arabia and the silks of China and the spices of India and the gold of Africa came together in a slow, magnificent confluence that filled the city's coffers and her storehouses for many long centuries. Imagine, if you will, the slow approach of a caravan in the closing hour of the day, drawing near the great city after many weeks upon the desert roads. You may see them in the soft distance, a long patient line of camels moving in single file along the well-worn track that leads from the south, their great hooves raising small puffs of pale dust that hang briefly in the still evening air before settling slowly back to the warm earth. There are perhaps 100 camels in this particular caravan, each one laden with great bundles wrapped in coarse linen cloth and tied with strong cords of palm fibre, each bundle carefully balanced against its companion to keep the load even across the long days of the journey. The camels themselves are tall and graceful in their slow walking, their heads held high, their long necks curved gently with the patient rhythm of their pacing, their soft brown eyes half closed against the slanting light of the sun. The cargo of this caravan is a treasure beyond easy reckoning. In some of the bundles there is frankincense, the precious resin of the small twisted trees that grow only in the high country of southern Arabia, harvested with the gentle wounding of the bark and gathered after the slow weeping of the tears, dried into small golden chunks that release their warm, mysterious perfume when burned upon the altars of temples and in the censers of fine homes. In other bundles there is myrrh, the darker sister resin with its haunting fragrance of bitter herbs and old prayers, used in the embalming of the dead, in the making of sacred ointments, in the wines that the great Romans favoured at their evening feasts. Still other bundles there is the precious bdellium, a sweet dark resin used in the most expensive perfumes, and the rare onycha, a translucent shell that smells of the sea and is burned in the holiest of sanctuaries. But the caravan carries other wonders besides the great resins. There are bolts of fine cotton from the river valleys of distant India, woven so finely that their threads seem almost to disappear into a single shimmering surface. There are small carved boxes of precious sandalwood, the wood itself releasing its sweet, lingering perfume even through the wrappings of linen, their interiors filled with smaller treasures still, with tiny vials of pure rose oil, with little packets of precious spices, with delicate strands of pearls drawn from the warm Gulf waters far to the south. There are small jars of black peppercorns, each one worth its weight in silver in the markets of Rome, and tiny pouches of saffron, the dried pistils of the autumn crocus, gathered by hand in the highlands of Persia, more precious than gold by weight, capable of dyeing an entire pot of rice into the warm colour of a desert sunset, with only the smallest pinch of its red threads. Walking beside the camels, the men of the caravan are silent in the soft hour of the closing day. They have walked for many weeks, perhaps for many months, and their faces are weathered to the colour of well-worn leather, their eyes calm and patient and far-seeing. They wear long, loose robes of pale wool and linen, their heads wrapped in soft, flowing turbans that protect them from the sun and the wind, and at their belts hang small leather pouches containing their personal effects, a few coins, a small flint and tinder, perhaps a tiny carved amulet or a single well-worn coin from some distant homeland. They walk with the slow, easy gait of men who have learned to move at the unhurried pace of the desert, men whose bodies have grown attuned to the long, patient rhythms of journey. The leader of the caravan rides at its head upon a particularly fine white camel, taller than the others, with an embroidered saddlecloth of deep crimson edged with gold. He is a man of middle years, his beard beginning to silver at the temples, his face lined with the soft creases of long thought and patient observation. He wears a robe of fine indigo wool, and around his shoulders is draped a long shawl of pale linen embroidered with silver threads in the patterns of his particular trading family. He has made this journey many times before, perhaps 100 times, perhaps even more, and he knows the great roads of the desert as another man might know the small lanes of his native village. His mind, in this peaceful hour, is already turning toward the warm welcome that awaits him in Petra, toward the cool waters of the city's fountains, toward the soft cushions of the inn where he will rest his weary body, toward the long evenings of careful negotiation that lie ahead in the great trading halls. As the caravan draws nearer to the gates of the city, the slow sound of its approach reaches the ears of the watchmen upon the walls, the soft rhythmic plodding of the camel hooves, the gentle clinking of the harness bells that hang from the necks of the lead animals, the low, patient calls of the cameleers as they encourage their charges across the final miles. The watchmen above the gate raise their voices in the traditional call of greeting, a long melodious cry that has been used in these lands for many centuries, and the answering call drifts back up from the caravan in the same ancient tones, the soft music of two voices speaking across the distance in a language older than any modern tongue. When at last the caravan reaches the great inn that stands just outside the city walls, the camels are brought to their slow rest, kneeling down upon the warm sand in their patient, curving manner, their great folded legs settling beneath them with a soft, satisfied groan. The cameleers begin the slow work of unloading the precious bundles, carrying them with care into the cool storerooms of the inn, where they will be inspected and weighed in the morning by the merchants of Petra who have come to make their bids. The lead camel is stroked gently behind its ears by the master of the caravan, who whispers a few quiet words of thanks in its soft, drooping ear, and the great, patient creature blinks its long-lashed eyes in slow acknowledgement. In a courtyard behind the inn, water has been drawn from a deep well, and the camels are led one by one to a long stone trough where they may drink their fill. The slow, peaceful sound of their drinking, the soft plashing of cool water, and the long, gentle drawing of breath mingles softly with the quiet voices of the cameleers as they prepare their own evening meal beside the small cooking fires they have lit in the corner of the yard. The smoke from these fires drifts upward in slow blue ribbons against the deepening twilight sky, carrying upon it the warm scents of wood smoke and roasting grain, and the patient peace of journey's end. Let your slow attention drift now toward those skilled and patient souls whose careful hands, working through long days in their small workshops, have created the soft beauty that fills the homes and the markets and the temples of Petra. The great city is wealthy beyond measure, of course, because of the caravans that pass through her gates, but her wealth is also kept and renewed by the quiet labour of her own craftspeople, by the dyers and the weavers, by the potters and the metalworkers, by the woodcarvers and the leather shapers, be the patient men and women who, generation after generation, have practised the soft arts that turn raw materials into the things of useful beauty. Consider, in this peaceful hour of fading light, the small workshop of a textile dyer tucked into a narrow lane behind one of the quieter market squares. The shop is open to the street at its front, with a low counter where finished goods are displayed, and a deeper inner room where the work itself is done. As you approach, the air grows rich with extraordinary scents. The sharp, mineral tang of the alum used to fix the colours, the heavy vegetal sweetness of the dye baths simmering in their great copper kettles, the faint organic perfume of the wools and linens themselves, soft and earthy and warm as the side of a sleeping animal. The dyer is an older woman, her hands stained the colour of crushed berries from the patient work of her many years. She wears a long apron of coarse linen over her simple robe, and her hair is wrapped in a length of dark cloth to keep it out of the steaming kettles. She moves slowly through her workshop with the quiet, confident grace of long practice, lifting a pale length of wool from one of the kettles with a long wooden paddle, holding it up to inspect its colour in the gentle evening light, then lowering it back into the bath for further saturation. The wool emerges from the kettle a deep, rich crimson, the colour drawn from countless tiny insects, the kermes beetle of the eastern lands, harvested patiently from the leaves of the oak trees and dried into small, dusty pellets that release their precious red colour when steeped in the hot water of the dye bath. In another kettle, a length of fine linen is being dyed a deep, soft blue, the colour drawn from the indigo plant, brought up from the river valleys of distant India, fermented in great vats and then mixed with lime water to release its colour. The blue is so deep and so saturated that it seems almost to glow with its own inner light, and as the linen is lifted from the bath and exposed to the air, the colour transforms before your eyes, deepening from a soft greenish hue into the rich luminous blue of a deep evening sky. Other kettles hold other colours, the warm golden yellow of saffron, the soft pink of madder root, the deep dusky purple drawn from the small sea snails of the Phoenician coast, more precious than gold by weight, and used only for the robes of the wealthiest merchants and the highest priests. Around the workshop, completed lengths of dyed cloth hang from wooden racks to dry, their colours glowing against the warm sandstone walls like the petals of an enormous garden suspended in the still air. There are pure linens of the softest cream and ivory, ready to be embroidered with delicate patterns. There are wools of every colour imaginable, ready to be woven into the fine carpets and tunics of the wealthy. There are silks dyed in the most precious colours, brought as raw white silk from far distant China, and now transformed into the rich crimsons and deep blues and royal purples that will adorn the garments of kings and queens. Each length of cloth is a small triumph of patient labour, of careful knowledge passed down through countless generations, of the slow, peaceful art of making beauty with one's own quiet hands. Just down the lane from the dyer's shop, you may find the workshop of a weaver, a tall man with kind, deep-set eyes and long, slender fingers that move with extraordinary nimbleness across the threads of his great wooden loom. The loom itself is a magnificent piece of craftsmanship, its frame built of dark, polished oak, its mechanism of patient pulleys and weights perfectly balanced for the work it must do. The weaver sits upon a low bench before the loom, his hands flying softly through the threads, the rhythmic clack of his shuttle making a slow, hypnotic music that fills the workshop with its peaceful cadence. Above the loom, lengths of fine wool already wound onto the warp beam wait their turn to be transformed, and to one side a basket holds a great array of coloured threads upon their wooden spools, ready to be picked up and woven into the soft patterns that will appear gradually upon the loom's slowly growing surface. The cloth that he weaves now is a fine wool destined for a wealthy merchant, decorated with a pattern of soft repeating diamonds in alternating shades of cream and warm cinnamon brown. The pattern emerges slowly under his patient hands, each row of the weave taking him perhaps a minute to complete, and yet there is no impatience in his manner, no rushing toward completion. He works at the slow, even pace of a man who knows that beauty cannot be hurried, that each thread must be placed exactly where it belongs, that the perfection of the finished cloth depends upon the patient attention given to every smallest movement of the shuttle. In the soft golden light of the oil lamps that illuminate his workshop, the cloth seems to glow gently as it grows, the diamond pattern catching the light in slightly different ways with each subtle variation in the angle of the threads. In another small workshop nearby, a young apprentice sits at the feet of his master, a great craftsman of leather, learning the patient art of preparing and shaping the hides that will become saddles and bridles and sandals and bags. The workshop smells of leather and oil and the rich, smoky perfume of the small fire over which the master is heating an iron tool. The young apprentice, perhaps 13 or 14 years of age, watches with the eager, focused attention of one who has been chosen for this work and who feels its quiet importance settling slowly into his bones. His master, a man with hands like worn brown stones, demonstrates the proper way to work a small piece of leather, pulling it with steady, even pressure across the curve of a wooden shaping tool, his movements so practiced that they appear almost effortless, though the boy can already see, with growing respect, that they are the result of 40 years of patient daily work. The light has now dimmed to that soft amber glow of the closing twilight, and one by one the workshops along the lane are beginning to close their shutters and lower their curtains for the night. The dyer covers her kettles with their wooden lids. The weaver carefully stretches a clean cloth over his loom to protect it from the dust. The leather worker sets aside his tools upon their proper hooks. There is a quiet ceremony to these small evening rituals, the same gestures repeated each night across the years, the gentle laying down of the day's work in preparation for the long piece of evening rest. Allow yourself now to be drawn gently back into the warm circle of a household at its evening hour, into the soft, lamp-lit space where the day's labour gives way at last to the slow, peaceful pleasures of food shared among those whom one loves. The evening meal in ancient Petra was, as it has been in nearly every civilization across the long centuries of human time, a kind of small daily ceremony, a quiet ritual of gathering and rest, a soft, unhurried pause that drew together the scattered threads of the day into the gentle weave of family and home. To witness such a meal even in the soft light of imagination is to feel the deep, patient warmth of a way of life lived close to the earth and close to the seasons, close to the simple pleasures of nourishment and conversation and the quiet companionship of shared bread. The dining room of our household, that same modest dwelling we entered in an earlier moment of our journey, is now arranged for the evening meal. The low cedar table has been moved to the centre of the room, and around it have been placed thick cushions of woven wool, upon which the family will recline in the manner of the Eastern peoples, leaning gently upon their left elbows and reaching with their right hands to take their food. The cushions are arranged in a rough horseshoe shape, leaving one side of the table open so that the household servants may bring in and remove the dishes without disturbing the diners. Upon the table itself a long cloth of fine linen has been spread, embroidered along its edges with a simple pattern of vines and small flowers, the work of the mistress of the house in her younger years. The first dish to be placed upon the table is a great wooden bowl filled with hummus, the smooth, creamy paste of crushed chickpeas and sesame seed and lemon, and the deep golden olive oil pressed in the groves of the western hills. The hummus has been drizzled in a careful pattern with the finest oil and sprinkled with a fragrant dusting of the bright red sumac, that small tart spice made from the dried berries of the sumac shrub, which adds a soft lemony brightness to many of the dishes of the desert peoples. Beside the hummus stands a clay platter heaped with warm flatbreads, fresh from the household oven, their tops marked with the gentle imprint of the baker's fingers, their crusts the warm colour of toasted wheat, their fragrance rising in soft yeasted ribbons into the lamplit air. Next come the smaller dishes, each one prepared with the patient attention of the mistress and her one elderly servant. There is a deep bowl of olives in their golden brine, their skins glossy and dark, their flesh firm and salty. There is a plate of soft white cheese made from the milk of the family's own goats, drizzled with honey and sprinkled with crushed thyme. There is a dish of small sweet onions roasted slowly in the embers of the cooking fire until their interiors have grown soft and golden and their skins have caramelized to a deep glossy brown. There is a small jar of fragrant garlic paste mixed with crushed parsley and a generous splash of the same fine olive oil, ready to be spread upon the warm bread or used to enliven any of the other dishes. The center of the meal, when it arrives, is a great clay pot of slow-simmered lamb prepared in the Eastern manner with onions and leeks and the fragrant resinous spices of the desert lands, with cinnamon and cardamom and a careful pinch of the precious saffron. The lamb has been cooking gently since the early afternoon, the pot covered tightly with a heavy lid and set into the warm coals of the hearth, where the slow, patient heat has rendered the meat so tender that it falls apart at the merest touch of a spoon. The sauce that has formed around it is rich and deep, the colour of warm copper, fragrant with the patient mingling of all its slow ingredients, and it is ladled now into a great central serving bowl from which the family will dip their bread and serve themselves with small portions onto their individual plates. The family gathers slowly around the table in their accustomed places. The master of the house takes his place at the head of the table, a man perhaps in his late 40s, with kind, intelligent eyes, and a beard streaked just at its edges with the first soft silver of his approaching middle age. He wears a comfortable robe of soft wool the colour of warm sand, and his hands, as he settles himself upon his cushions, are the careful hands of a man who has worked all day in the patient business of trade, and is now ready for the gentle pleasures of his home. Beside him sits the mistress of the house, dressed in a long robe of pale blue linen, her hair loosened from its daytime wrapping and falling in soft waves about her shoulders. Their 2 children, a boy of perhaps 10 years and a small girl of 7, settle themselves upon their own cushions with the quiet eagerness of children, who know that their long day's adventures are now drawing toward the comfort of food and family. The master of the house begins the meal with a soft blessing in the old Nabatean tongue, a few simple words of thanks for the food before them and for the patient hands that have prepared it, his voice low and gentle in the warm lamplit air. The mistress responds with the traditional answering phrase, and then, with a small smile and a nod, she invites everyone to begin. The family reaches with their right hands, breaking off pieces of the warm flatbread and using them as small spoons to scoop up portions of the hummus, the olive oil, the lamb stew. The eating is unhurried and conversational, with long pauses between mouthfuls during which the master describes the events of his day, or the mistress recounts a small story from the marketplace, or one of the children asks a question about something they observed during their afternoon play. A small clay pitcher of pale wine has been set upon the table, watered down according to the custom of the time, so that it is more refreshing than intoxicating, and from this pitcher the master of the house pours small portions into each of the simple wine cups of the household. The wine is the soft golden colour of late afternoon light, made from grapes grown in the small terraced vineyards of the western hills, fermented slowly in clay jars buried in the cool earth. It carries upon its taste the gentle warmth of summer sun and the soft mineral perfume of the limestone soil from which the vines drew their nourishment, and it pairs perfectly with the rich, slow flavours of the meal. As the meal proceeds, the room itself seems to grow more deeply peaceful, the small flames of the oil lamps casting their gentle golden light upon the table and upon the calm faces of the family, the slow conversation drifting in soft, unhurried currents, The sounds of breaking bread and quiet laughter, and the gentle clinking of clay cups against the surface of the cedar table. Outside, the night has now fully arrived, and through the small high window above the table you can see a single bright star glimmering against a sky of deep indigo. The family lingers over their meal for a long while, and the evening flows around them like a slow, peaceful river, carrying them softly toward the rest that awaits them at the close of this gentle, ordinary, beautiful day. When the evening meal has at last drawn to its peaceful close and the dishes have been quietly carried away to be washed in the small kitchen, the family of our quiet household settles into the deeper, softer rhythms of the late evening hours, when there is no more work to be done and no more obligations to be met, when the long day at last surrenders entirely to the gentle pleasures of music and story and the slow, restful conversations that mark the closing of any well-lived day. This was the hour in ancient Petra, as in nearly every civilization of human history, when the songs of the people were sung, when the old tales were told, when the small wisdoms of the elders were passed quietly into the listening hearts of the young. In our household, the master of the house has now retrieved from a small wooden chest set against the eastern wall a slender, beautifully carved instrument, a long-necked lyre crafted from the dark wood of the apricot tree, its strings of finely twisted gut, Protestant, its body inlaid with small pieces of mother-of-pearl that catch the light of the oil lamps in soft, shifting gleams. He cradles the instrument gently in his lap, settling himself upon a low cushion in the corner of the room, and begins to tune the strings with quiet patience, his fingers turning the small wooden pegs with infinite care, his head bent slightly to listen to the soft tones as they emerge. Each string, as it comes into proper pitch, releases a soft, mellow note that hangs in the warm air for a long, lovely moment before fading slowly into silence. The mistress of the house, having completed her supervisions in the kitchen, settles upon another cushion not far from her husband, and she takes up her own instrument, a small frame drum covered with a thin membrane of dressed goat skin, its rim hung with tiny silver bells that ring softly with the slightest movement. She holds the drum in her left hand and rests her right hand gently upon its surface, ready to mark the rhythm of whatever song her husband shall begin. The two children, the boy of 10 and the small girl of 7, settle themselves upon a third cushion between their parents, leaning gently against each other in the soft, sleepy posture of children who are pleasantly full from their evening meal and ready to be carried away by the music of their elders. When the lyre is at last in tune to his satisfaction, the master of the house begins to play, his fingers moving across the strings in a slow, melodic pattern, drawing forth a soft, plaintive melody that seems to belong to the deep, ancient heart of the desert lands. The melody is in a minor mode with slow, falling phrases that resolve into long, peaceful sustains, and it is perhaps several thousand years old, passed down from generation to generation in this family and in many others, its origins lost in the soft mists of antiquity. After a few measures of the introduction, the mistress begins to mark a soft, rolling rhythm upon her drum, the silver bells chiming gently with each gentle stroke, and then the master begins to sing, his voice low and warm, the words of an old Nabatean song that tells the story of a shepherd who fell in love with the morning star. The song unfolds slowly with long lyrical phrases that seem to mirror the patient unfolding of the desert dawn. The shepherd watches each evening as the bright star rises above the eastern hills, and his heart fills with a strange, sweet longing for the distant celestial beauty whom he can never reach. He brings his finest songs and his most beautiful gifts to the small altar he has built upon the highest hilltop, and he leaves them there each evening as offerings, hoping that the star will see them and know that she is loved by a humble shepherd in the world below. Year after year he climbs his hilltop and leaves his offerings, and year after year the star rises above the eastern hills, and the shepherd grows old at his patient work, his beard turning to silver, his back beginning to bow with the long years. The melody of the song winds gently upward and downward through its slow phrases, and the children listen with the rapt attention of young ones who have heard the song many times before, but who are nevertheless drawn into its patient spell each time it is sung. The little girl in particular has settled into a half-dreaming state, her eyelids growing heavy, her small hand resting in soft trust against her brother's arm. The boy himself sits more upright, his face thoughtful in the soft lamplight, watching the careful movements of his father's fingers upon the strings of the lyre, with the attentive eye of a young apprentice who, in his own time, will also learn this music and pass it on to his own children many years hence. When the song reaches its end, the shepherd at last understands in his old age that the star has known him all along, that her gentle light has shone each evening upon his climbing form with the same patient love that he himself has poured into his offerings, that the great distance between earth and heaven was perhaps not so great after all, that in the language of love the whole sky may sometimes be only a single soft breath wide. The final notes of the lyre fade slowly into the warm air of the room, and the gentle chiming of the small silver bells comes softly to its rest, and for a long, peaceful moment no one in the family speaks at all, allowing the song to settle gently into the deep silence of the evening. After a time the master of the house begins another piece, this one livelier in its rhythm but no less tender in its mood, a song that accompanies a traditional dance of the desert peoples. The mistress takes up the rhythm upon her drum with greater energy, the silver bells now ringing more clearly, and the small girl, suddenly waking from her half-slumber, climbs from the cushion and begins to sway gently in the centre of the room, her small feet making the merest patterns upon the carpet, her arms lifting and falling in the soft motions of a dance she has been learning from her mother since she could first walk. Her brother claps his hands softly in time with the rhythm, and her parents continue their gentle music, and for a few minutes the whole room is filled with the soft, joyful warmth of family music, the sweet, simple pleasure of an art that has been practiced in this very land for countless generations. When the dance has come to its end and the small girl has returned to her cushion, slightly breathless, her cheeks flushed pink with happy exertion, the master of the house lays his lyre aside and begins to tell a story. It is an old tale, one of the favourite stories of the children, about a clever fox who learns to share his cleverness with the simpler creatures of the desert. The master tells the story slowly, with careful attention to each small detail, his voice rising and falling in the gentle cadences of practiced storytelling, his hands moving softly to illustrate the actions of the various characters. The children listen with the deep, full attention of young ones who love a familiar story told well, their eyes shining in the soft lamplight, their small breaths slowing into the peaceful rhythm of complete, contented absorption. Let your gentle thoughts now drift outward from the warm circle of household and family, outward across the city itself, outward across the centuries that have passed since these stones were first raised, and consider in this peaceful hour of deepening twilight the slow, mysterious river of time that flows through every place and every life and every quiet stone upon the earth. For Petra is not only a city, not only an assembly of magnificent monuments and humble homes and patient water channels, Petra is also a long, slow meditation upon time itself, a stone scripture written across 2,000 years of sun and wind and rain, a quiet teacher whose patient lessons can be received only by those who have learned to listen with the deepest stillness of the heart. Consider, as you sit upon a low stone bench in the quieter quarters of the city, watching the evening shadows lengthen across the worn flagstones, the simple, profound truth that every stone you can see was once raised by hands now long returned to dust. The masons who carved the great facade of the Treasury, who shaped the columns of the colonnaded street, who fitted the smooth paving stones beneath your feet, lived and worked and laughed and loved and died in the soft span of their own brief mortal lives, just as you are now living in the soft span of yours. Their names are mostly lost, their faces are unknown, their joys and sorrows have long since faded into the gentle silence of the unremembered past. And yet their work remains here all around you, in every patient detail of this magnificent city, in every careful chisel mark upon the warm sandstone, in every smooth-fitted joint of the great paving slabs. There is something profoundly comforting in this slow truth, something that softens the small anxieties of one's own brief moment in the great river of time. We tend, in the busy hurry of our modern lives, to feel that our own small concerns are urgent, that our small successes and failures matter enormously, that the events of our days are heavy with consequence. But to sit here in this peaceful hour, surrounded by the quiet work of 2,000 vanished years, is to feel one's own busy mind growing softly quieter, one's own small concerns settling gently into a larger and more peaceful perspective. The mason who carved this stone bench upon which you sit had his own concerns, his own loves, his own sorrows, and they mattered to him as deeply as your concerns and loves and sorrows matter to you. And now he rests quietly somewhere in the soft embrace of the earth, and his bench remains, smoothed by the patient passage of 2,000 years of human bodies, seeking rest in the cool of the evening. The stones themselves teach a kind of slow, deep patience that is difficult to find in the modern world. They were here before us, and they will be here after us, and they receive each passing day with the same calm, unhurried welcome. They do not rush, they do not grieve, they do not anticipate. They simply rest in the warm light of the sun, in the cool blue of the moon, in the soft amber of twilight, allowing the slow seasons to wash over them as a calm river washes over the patient bed of stones along its course. The wind that blows now across the warm stones of Petra is the same wind that blew across them yesterday, and 1,000 years ago, and 1,000 years before that, and the stones receive it now as they always have, with the silent welcome of those who have learned the deep, sleepy art of being. Consider, too, the slow miracle of the colours in these ancient stones, the patient mineral beauty that has been formed not in the swift years of human history, but in the deep, drowsy aeons of geological time. The pale apricots and deep terracottas and soft, dreamy violets that ripple through the sandstone of Petra were laid down millions of years ago, when great rivers carried sediments through ancient lands, when iron and copper and other minerals seeped slowly through the layered grains of sand, when the patient pressure of the upper world compressed everything into the warm, beautiful stone that we now see all around us. The colours that the carvers of Petra revealed by cutting away the surfaces of the cliffs were not made by them, but only uncovered like beautiful patterns hidden within the deep grain of an ancient piece of wood, waiting patiently across millions of years for the moment of their gentle exposure. And the wind, that other patient sculptor, has been at its slow work upon these stones for far longer than any human hand. The carved figures upon the facades of the great tombs, those goddesses and winged victories whose features have softened into the merest suggestions, were once carved with sharp precision, with every detail of cheek and brow and flowing drapery rendered in fine, crisp lines. And the wind has spent 2,000 years quietly at its work upon them, smoothing away the sharp edges, softening the precise details, returning each carved figure slowly and gently toward the original piece of the unworked stone from which it was first drawn. There is no malice in this slow erosion, no destruction. There is only the patient work of the wind, doing what wind has always done, and the result is a different kind of beauty, a softened beauty, a beauty that speaks of rest and forgiveness, and the slow, deep peace of all things returning at last to their original quiet. To sit in the soft amber light of this evening, watching the deepening shadows stretch slowly across the warm stones, is to feel oneself becoming part of this great slow river of time. Feel one's own small heart beating in time with the patient pulse of stones that have been resting here for hundreds of generations. There is no urgency in this place, there is no demand, there is only the soft invitation to rest, to breathe slowly, to allow one's busy modern mind to settle into the deeper, drowsier rhythms of stone and wind and sun. And in this softening of the busy mind, certain quiet truths begin to make themselves felt, truths that cannot be spoken in the bright noise of the daytime world, but that whisper softly in the warm hush of an evening like this one. The truth that the small concerns of any one life are softened by the larger, slower context of all the lives that have passed before. The truth that beauty endures in the most unexpected places, in the smooth wear of an old paving stone, in the gentle softening of a carved figure, in the warm ribbons of colour that the wind has revealed in the bare cliff face. The truth that there is a deep, restful peace available to anyone who has learned to sit still long enough, to breathe slowly enough, to receive the patient teaching of stones that have been quietly teaching for 2,000 patient years. The light has now deepened still further toward the soft, cool blue of evening, and the great stones of Petra glow with a gentler colour, a deeper rose, almost the colour of the inside of a wild rose at the moment of its fullest opening. Single bird sings somewhere in the high cliffs, its small voice rising and falling in a slow, unhurried melody that seems to belong to this hour and no other. And the city dreams on around you as she has dreamed for 2,000 soft years, holding her warm stones gently against her sleeping heart. Allow your gentle thoughts now to drift slowly through the long centuries that have passed across these warm stones, to consider the slow, dreamlike fading of the kingdom of Petra, the gradual softening of her power, and the gentle quieting of her busy streets, until at last the great city slipped softly into the long sleep, from which she would not be wakened for nearly 1,000 years. There is no harsh story to be told here, no sudden disaster, no violent ending. There is only the slow, patient waning of one of the most beautiful kingdoms of the ancient world, the gentle setting of a great sun across a long, soft afternoon that lasted, in its slow unfolding, for many quiet centuries. The kingdom of the Nabateans flourished at its peak in the centuries just before and just after the turning of the Great Age, when the long caravan trade routes from southern Arabia and the eastern lands brought a constant flow of precious goods through Petra's gentle gates. The wealth of this trade made the city extraordinarily prosperous, and the kings of Petra grew so powerful that they could speak as equals with the great empires that surrounded them, with the late Hellenistic kingdoms to the west, with the rising power of Rome, with the patient, ancient kingdoms of Egypt and Syria and the lands beyond the great Euphrates. The Nabateans were skilled diplomats, and they used their wealth and their geographical position to negotiate carefully with their powerful neighbours, paying tributes when necessary, forming alliances when possible, and managing for many long centuries to preserve their independence in a world where small kingdoms often disappeared with shocking quickness. In the year that the Romans now mark as 106 of the Common Era, the kingdom passed at last into the embrace of the great Roman Empire, becoming the province of Arabia Petraea. This was no violent conquest, no great battle remembered in song. The Emperor Trajan, recognizing the strategic and economic importance of the region, simply absorbed the kingdom into his vast administrative system, and the people of Petra continued their daily lives much as they had before, though now with Roman administrators rather than Nabatean kings, with Roman roads being built and maintained, with Roman coins beginning slowly to replace the older Nabatean currency in the bustling marketplaces. The transition was so gentle and so gradual that it would have seemed to most ordinary citizens simply a soft change in the management of distant affairs that had little immediate effect upon the patient rhythms of their daily work. For the next 200 years, Petra remained a prosperous city under Roman rule, and indeed many of the most beautiful monuments that still stand today were either built or substantially elaborated during this Roman period. The great colonnaded street was repaved with the magnificent flagstones that you walked upon earlier this evening. The triumphal Temenos Gate received its present elegant form. New temples were dedicated, new public buildings raised, and the city continued to be a vibrant meeting point of cultures where Nabatean, Greek, Roman, and Arabian peoples mingled in the long, shaded porticos of the great markets. But the slow currents of history were already beginning their gentle turning. The discovery of new sea routes from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean meant that the great caravan trade, which had been the very lifeblood of Petra's prosperity, gradually shifted away from the long overland journeys through the desert and toward the faster, cheaper passages by ship. Other trading cities rose in importance, particularly the great port of Palmyra to the north, which captured a growing share of the trade that had once flowed through Petra. The city's importance began to decline, slowly, gently, with the slow, patient inevitability of a tide receding from a long shore. In the year 363 of the Common Era, a great earthquake struck the region, and many of Petra's buildings were damaged or destroyed. The city was rebuilt, of course, for her people loved her and would not abandon her easily. But the rebuilding was less ambitious than the original construction, and many of the finer details were never restored to their former glory. As the centuries passed, the city continued in a kind of long, slow afternoon, smaller now than she had been at her peak, less wealthy, less crowded, but still alive, still inhabited, still a place where families lived and worked and loved and dreamed. The arrival of Christianity in the region brought a new layer of life to the ancient city. Some of the great Nabatean tombs were converted into churches, and small Christian communities established themselves in the various quarters of the city. The monastery, that great facade you visited upon the high plateau, received its modern name during this period. When small groups of Christian monks took up residence in some of the carved chambers, attracted by the deep silence and the magnificent isolation of the place. The churches of Petra were modest compared to the grand basilicas of the great cities of the empire, but they were beautiful in their own quiet way, with mosaic floors of small coloured stones with simple stone altars, with the gentle smell of beeswax candles burning slowly in the cool stone interiors. In the year 55-1, another great earthquake struck the region, and this time the damage was more severe. The complex water systems that had sustained the city for so many centuries were badly disrupted, and the patient genius of the channels and cisterns and dams could no longer be fully restored. Without reliable water, the population of the city began slowly to leave, drifting away to other settlements, to the smaller villages of the surrounding hills, to the great cities of the coast where work and water were more easily found. The decline accelerated through the 7th and 8th centuries, as the great caravan routes shifted further away and as new political powers reshaped the surrounding land. By the time the early Islamic centuries had passed, Petra was largely empty, her great monuments standing silent in the warm desert air, her colonnaded streets no longer ringing with the soft clamour of trade, her temples no longer perfumed with incense, the homes no longer warm with the sounds of family meals. The wind, that patient sculptor, began its slow work upon her stones, smoothing the carved figures, softening the architectural details, drifting fine sand into the corners of the abandoned chambers. Few small communities of Bedouin shepherds continued to use the city as shelter for themselves and their flocks, taking refuge in the cool tomb chambers during the hot summer days, lighting small fires in the great carved halls during the cold winter nights. But the city as a city had passed gently into her long sleep. For nearly 1,000 years, Petra remained largely unknown to the outside world. The great historians of distant lands occasionally mentioned her name in their writings, but few had actually seen her, and the location of the famous rose-red city was preserved only in the memories of the local Bedouin tribes, who passed down through their generations the secret knowledge of her hidden location, the narrow canyon entrance, the magnificent monuments slumbering in the warm desert silence. The shepherds tended their flocks among her silent ruins. Their children played in her empty courtyards. Their old men told stories around small evening fires beside her ancient walls, and the city dreamed on, peacefully, under the warm sun and the cool moon, and the slow, eternal turning of the desert seasons. There was no sadness in this long sleep, no tragic ending. The city had simply moved from her busy public season into her quiet, private one, like a beloved old grandmother slipping gently from her years of active labour into her years of warm, restful sitting beside the hearth, watching the firelight dance softly upon the familiar walls of her own quiet home. Through the long, dreaming centuries when Petra slept beneath her warm desert sun, untouched by the busy currents of the wider world, there remained always a few quiet souls who knew her, who lived among her sleeping stones, who tended their goats in her shadowed courtyards and their small fires in her cool vaulted chambers. These were the Bedouin peoples, the nomadic shepherds and tribesmen of the surrounding desert lands, whose ancestors had wandered these hills and valleys for many hundreds of generations, who knew every spring and every shaded canyon and every patient rock formation by name and by old story. They were the gentle guardians of Petra during the long sleep of her abandonment, the keepers of her secret, the soft watching presence that maintained, for nearly 1,000 years, the quiet thread of human connection to her ancient stones. The most prominent of the Bedouin tribes who made Petra their seasonal home in those long centuries were the Budul, a small and proud people who claimed in their oral traditions to be descended directly from the Nabateans themselves, be the very last living thread of the great kingdom that had built these magnificent monuments. Whether or not this claim was strictly true in any genealogical sense, What was undoubtedly true was that the Badul had lived in close, intimate relationship with the city of Petra for so many generations that they had come to embody in their daily lives and in their slow oral histories, kind of living continuity with the ancient civilization that had first carved these stones. Imagine, in the soft, peaceful imagination of this evening hour, a Bedouin family of perhaps the year 1500 of the Common Era, making their seasonal home within the cool, dry shelter of one of the great carved tombs along the eastern cliffs. The family is small, perhaps 6 or 7 souls in all, and they have arrived here only a few weeks before, bringing with them their flock of sheep and goats, their few patient camels, their carefully bundled tent of woven goat hair, their small store of provisions for the coming weeks of their stay. They will remain in this place through the cooler months of the autumn and winter, when the local pastures are most lush before moving on with the changing of the seasons toward other traditional grazing grounds. The grandfather of the family is a man of perhaps 70 years, his face lined with the deep, soft creases of a lifetime spent in the open air, his beard the colour of dust and silver mingled, his eyes pale and far-seeing as the eyes of a man who has spent his many decades reading the small, quiet signs of the desert. He has spent every winter of his life among these ancient stones, as did his father before him, and his grandfather before that, and his great-grandfather before that, in a long, patient line that stretches back into the soft mists of unrecorded family memory. He knows every chamber of every great tomb, every channel of every old water system, every small spring, and every hidden cistern in the surrounding hills. He carries in the soft architecture of his own slow mind a more detailed knowledge of Petra than any scholar of the modern world will ever possess, a knowledge built not from books but from the patient living of 70 long, gentle years among these warm stones. In the evening hours, after the goats have been gathered into a small pen made of stacked stones, after the few simple chores of the day have been completed, the family gathers around a small fire built just outside the entrance of their chosen tomb chamber. The fire is fed with dried goat dung and small twigs of juniper and acacia, and it burns with a soft, fragrant flame that casts gentle shadows upon the warm sandstone walls around them. Above the fire, a small clay pot holds the evening meal, a simple stew of lentils and onions, fragrant with the patient herbs of the desert, and beside the fire, a flat stone has been heated to the proper temperature for the baking of small, round flatbreads, which the grandmother of the family is now patiently preparing. After the meal has been eaten and the small clay cups of mint tea have been served, the grandfather begins to tell stories, as he has done every evening for as long as anyone in the family can remember. The stories are of many kinds. Some are old folk tales, the patient narratives of foolish men and clever foxes and patient maidens, the same stories that have been told around Bedouin fires for countless generations. Some are stories of his own life, of journeys he has made through distant deserts, of strange travellers he has met, of remarkable things he has seen, and some, the most precious of all, are stories about Petra herself, about the great vanished kingdom whose monuments rise around them, about the imagined lives of the kings and merchants who once walked these very stones. Many of these stories about Petra have been passed down through the generations of the Badul, and while their historical accuracy may sometimes be questioned by scholars, they preserve a kind of poetic truth, a soft, intuitive understanding of the city's ancient meaning that no written history could quite capture. The grandfather speaks of the Treasury, that great pink facade you stood before earlier in the evening, and tells the old story that the pharaohs of Egypt hid their treasures within its high-carved urn. The story is not strictly true, of course, but it captures something essential about the impression the building makes, about the sense of mystery and hidden wealth that has always surrounded it. The young grandchildren listen with wide, dark eyes, their small bodies wrapped in coarse woolen blankets against the cooling air, their small minds drinking in the words of their grandfather as the desert drinks in the rare and precious rain. The stars, in this hour, have begun to fill the deep blue dome of the evening sky, scattering themselves with a generosity that is impossible to imagine in any modern city. There are thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands, ranging from the brightest, sharpest points of pure white light down to the faintest, most delicate gleams that can be seen only when the eye has fully adjusted to the desert darkness. The great river of the Milky Way pours softly across the entire arc of the sky, its dim, milky glow spreading like spilled cream across the deep blue cloth of the heavens, and against this magnificent backdrop the great cliff faces of Petra stand as soft dark silhouettes, their warm stones glowing faintly with the captured heat of the long day's sun. The grandfather points upward with a slow, careful finger and begins to tell the small grandchildren the names of the constellations as the Bedouin people know them, the patient ancient names that have been spoken in these desert lands since long before the days of the Nabateans, since long before any of the great kingdoms whose ruins now slumber in these warm hills. He points to the great twisting form of the scorpion low in the southern sky, with its bright red star Antares glowing softly in the heart of the constellation. He points to the 7 small bright stars of the Pleiades, which the desert peoples have always called the sisters, gathering themselves close together for warmth in the cool desert sky. He points to the great square of Pegasus riding high in the eastern heavens, and to the long curving form of Cassiopeia making her slow eternal turn around the still center of the polar star. The fire burns lower as the evening deepens, and one by one the small grandchildren grow drowsy, their eyelids growing heavy, their small heads beginning to lean against the comfortable shoulders of their parents. The grandfather's voice grows softer too, his stories slower, more dreamlike, until at last his words drift gently into a long, peaceful silence, and the family sits together in the quiet warmth of their small fire, watching the stars wheel softly above the dreaming city of stone. The long dreaming sleep of Petra continued through the slow turning of many quiet centuries, a sleep so deep and so peaceful that the very memory of her existence faded almost entirely from the wider world beyond the surrounding deserts. To the great cities of Europe, to the busy capitals of Asia, to the merchant ports of the eastern Mediterranean, the rose-red city carved in stone became little more than a soft, half-believed legend, mentioned only in occasional passages of ancient texts, dimly remembered as a place that had once existed somewhere in the patient deserts to the east of the Holy Land, but whose precise location had grown softly uncertain across the centuries. Travelers who passed through the region rarely knew that they were passing within a single day's walk of one of the most magnificent ancient cities ever built by human hands. The Bedouin tribes who knew the secret kept it gently among themselves, partly from caution against outside interference with their ancestral lands, partly from the simple fact that no one ever asked them about it in terms they recognized. It was in the soft summer of the year 1812 that the long sleep of Petra was at last gently disturbed by the slow approach of a single curious traveller, a young Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who was travelling through the region under the name Ibrahim ibn Abdullah, dressed in the local manner, fluent in Arabic, careful and respectful in all his interactions with the people of the desert lands. Burckhardt was on his way from Damascus toward Cairo, travelling slowly through the region we now call Jordan, when he heard tantalizing rumours from his Bedouin guides about magnificent ancient ruins hidden in a remote canyon a short distance off the main route. Burckhardt was, by temperament and training, exactly the kind of traveller who could approach Petra in the proper manner. He was patient, observant, and deeply respectful of local customs. He spoke the Arabic language well enough to converse easily with the Bedouin people he met, and he understood the importance of approaching their sacred and ancestral places with the appropriate quietness and humility. He proposed to his Bedouin guides that he wished to visit a small shrine, the supposed tomb of the prophet Aaron, which stood upon one of the high mountains beyond the canyon of Petra. This was a perfectly understandable wish for a pious Muslim traveller to express, and his guides agreed to lead him through the canyon to reach the shrine, perhaps without fully understanding what extraordinary monuments the foreign visitor would see along the way. Imagine the slow approach of that small party through the patient afternoon of an August day in 1812, the soft rhythm of the camel hooves upon the worn pathway, the gentle silence of the canyon walls rising on either side. Burckhardt, dressed in his desert robes, his face shaded by his flowing kufiya, must have felt his heart quickening as he passed through the narrow sikh, recognizing from the very first moments that he was approaching something far more remarkable than any small prophet's tomb could possibly justify. When the canyon at last opened to reveal the great facade of the Treasury, glowing in the warm afternoon light, he must have struggled mightily to maintain the calm, restrained manner appropriate to a humble pilgrim, when his entire scholarly heart would have been crying out to stop, to examine, to record, to draw with his careful traveller's hand every architectural detail of the magnificent monument before him. Burckhardt was forced to behave with extraordinary discretion during his single afternoon in Petra. His Bedouin guides were already beginning to grow suspicious that this foreign traveller showed unusual interest in the pre-Islamic ruins around him, and any obvious examination of the buildings would have led to immediate problems, perhaps even to the abandonment of his journey. He was therefore reduced to making only the briefest mental notes as they walked, registering the most general impressions of each great facade as it came into view, noting the approximate proportions, the most prominent decorative features, the relationship of one monument to another. By the time the small party had reached the supposed tomb of Aaron upon the high mountain, performed the appropriate prayers, and begun their return journey through the canyon, Burckhardt had seen enough to know with absolute certainty that he had found one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of his age. That same evening, in the quiet privacy of his journal, written by the soft light of a small oil lamp in his tent, Burckhardt began to record everything he could remember of what he had seen. His descriptions are masterpieces of patient, restrained scholarship, written in the careful prose of a man who understood that he was reintroducing to the modern world a city that had been sleeping, forgotten for nearly 1,000 years. He correctly identified the place as the ancient Petra known from classical Roman texts, basing his identification upon the geographical descriptions in those old sources and upon the magnificence of the ruins that he had glimpsed during his single brief afternoon among them. The publication of his journals, several years after his death from illness in Cairo, brought the news of his discovery to the scholarly world of Europe, and the slow process of the rediscovery of Petra had at last begun. In the decades that followed Burckhardt's visit, other travellers and scholars began to make the journey to Petra, slowly, carefully, with appropriate respect for the local Bedouin communities who had been the city's gentle guardians during the long centuries of her sleep. The early visitors travelled mostly in small, careful parties, often with Bedouin guides who had grown accustomed to the curious foreign interest in their ancestral ruins. Each new visitor added to the slow accumulation of knowledge about the city, drawing detailed sketches of the great facades, copying the inscriptions found upon the walls, gradually piecing together a fuller understanding of the ancient civilization that had built the place. The artist David Roberts visited in 1839, and his magnificent paintings and lithographs of Petra brought the visual splendor of the city into the drawing rooms of Victorian Europe for the first time. His soft, romantic depictions of the great facades glowing in the warm desert light captured something essential about the mood of Petra, the deep, peaceful melancholy of a great civilization gently fading into the soft embrace of the sands. Through his images, hundreds of thousands of people who would never themselves make the long journey to the desert canyon could nevertheless feel something of its slow, patient beauty. Through the latter half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th, the slow scholarly investigation of Petra continued, with archaeologists from many nations contributing their patient work to the understanding of the city's long history. Excavations were conducted with growing care, ancient inscriptions were translated, the complex water systems were mapped, the relationships between the various monuments were clarified. And throughout this slow process, the local Bedouin community, particularly the Bidul, continued to live among the ruins as they had done for so many generations, gradually adjusting their traditional patterns of life to accommodate the growing flow of scholarly and curious visitors from distant lands. In our own modern age, Petra has at last become widely known again, recognized as one of the great wonders of the ancient world, visited by hundreds of thousands of travelers each year. And yet, despite this gentle awakening from her long sleep, the city has retained in some essential way the deep, peaceful quietness of her dreaming century. Even now, when one walks through her silent canyons in the soft hour of evening, when the day's visitors have largely departed and only the warm stones remain, glowing in the fading amber light, it is still possible to feel the ancient peace of Petra the patient quiet that sustained her through her long, slow afternoon of soft forgetting and tender remembering. The full hush of evening has now descended upon the warm stones of Petra, and the great rose-red cliffs that earlier glowed with the amber fire of the setting sun have softened now into deep, dreamlike silhouettes against the deepening sky. The last warm colour has drained from the high horizons, and the world above the canyon walls has become an enormous, gentle dome of soft, mysterious blue, deepening moment by moment toward the fathomless indigo of the desert night. Stars are beginning to emerge in their slow, ancient procession, faint at first, only the brightest of them visible against the still luminous twilight, but each minute bringing 100 more, then 1,000, then 10,000, until at last the entire vault of heaven is sown so thickly with the soft, silvery seeds of starlight that the eye can scarcely take in their full multitude. You may sit now upon a smooth, warm rock at the eastern edge of the great valley, your back leaning gently against the cool sandstone of the cliff behind you, your eyes turned upward to receive the slow, ceremonial unfolding of the desert sky. The temperature has cooled now from the warm pleasantness of the late afternoon to the soft, refreshing coolness of the early evening, and the air carries upon its slow currents the deep, peaceful scents that belong to the desert at night, the dry sweetness of cooling stone, the faint perfume of the wild herbs that release their fragrance only in the cool hours, the deep, quiet smell of the patient sand itself. The stars above Petra are unlike the stars seen from any modern city in the world. Without the gentle competition of any artificial light to soften their brightness, they shine with a sharpness and a clarity that can almost startle the eye that has grown accustomed only to urban skies. The brightest of them, those great companions of the human race that have been named and known across countless generations, blaze with an almost crystalline intensity, each one a small, perfect needle of pure light suspended against the deep indigo background. Vega, high overhead now, gleams with the faint blue-white colour of the hottest stars, while warm orange Arcturus glows softly to the west, and golden Capella is just beginning to lift above the eastern horizon, climbing slowly into the great dome of the sky. Between the bright stars, in the patient spaces between the named constellations, lie countless smaller stars, each one fainter than the last, fading down through every gradation of brightness, until at the very edge of the eye's perception they merge softly into a kind of dim, milky shimmer that suggests the presence of stars too faint to be individually distinguished. And running across the entire arc of the sky, like a soft river of cream poured slowly across a great dark cloth, stretches the magnificent Milky Way, our own galaxy seen edge-on from within. Its dim, milky glow, not the light of any single star, but the combined light of hundreds of millions of distant suns, gathered into a soft, luminous band that reaches from one horizon to the other. The peacefulness of this slow, vast spectacle is difficult to describe in any modern language, for it touches something in the human heart that lies deeper than words, something old and patient and quietly grateful. To gaze upward at such a sky is to feel one's own small concerns growing softly smaller still, to feel the busy currents of one's daily thoughts settling into a deeper, slower rhythm, to feel oneself becoming part of the great patient quiet of the universe itself. The stars do not hurry. They have been there for billions of years, and they will be there for billions of years more, and they shine now upon the warm stones of Petra with the same calm, unhurried light with which they have shone upon her for 2,000 patient years. Tanned upon the Bedouin shepherds who tended their flocks here through the long centuries of her sleep, and upon all the patient generations of dreamers and travellers who have ever paused in the warm hush of an evening like this one, to gaze upward at their slow, eternal procession. The cliff faces of Petra have now become entirely dark silhouettes against the starlit sky, their warm rose colour invisible in this deep evening hour, their carved facades reduced to softened shapes that suggest rather than reveal the magnificent details that you saw earlier in the day. Yet there is a strange beauty in this softening, a peaceful quality that the brighter hours could not quite achieve. By starlight, the great monuments of Petra become something even more dreamlike, even more mythical, more like the shadowy forms of memory than the sharp realities of waking life. The Treasury, which earlier glowed in such warm rose detail, is now only a great rectangular silhouette against the starry sky, with the merest suggestions of its columns and its great central pediment visible against the slightly lighter background of the heavens. Soft wind moves through the great valley, carrying upon its slow currents the deep peace of the desert night. It is not a strong wind nor a sharp one, but a gentle, drowsy movement of the cooling air, which stirs occasionally the dry stems of the desert grasses and brushes softly against your skin like the lightest possible touch of a feather. The sound of the wind is almost absent, a mere whisper at the edge of hearing, and beneath that whisper lies a deep, peaceful silence that seems almost to have a texture of its own, a velvety quality that wraps softly around the entire valley and holds everything within it in a gentle embrace. Single small bird calls somewhere in the distance, a soft, drowsy note that hangs briefly in the still air before fading once again into the deep silence. Some night creature, perhaps a small desert fox, has come out to begin its quiet patrols, but its movements are so soft and so distant that you hear nothing of them, only sense perhaps the slow, careful presence somewhere out there in the warm darkness. The world has settled into the deep, patient peace of the desert night, and you settle yourself more comfortably against your warm rock, your eyes still tracing slowly the patterns of the stars above, your breath slowing into a gentle, peaceful rhythm. You may begin now to feel a quiet drowsiness gathering softly behind your eyes, the slow, sweet weight of a long day's gentle wandering settling at last into your peaceful body. There is no hurry to resist this drowsiness, no need to remain awake for any particular purpose. The stars will continue their slow turning whether you watch them or not, and the warm stones of Petra will continue their patient resting through all the long peaceful hours of the night. You may allow your eyelids to grow heavier, to droop gently downward, to close softly upon the sweet slow images of starlight and ancient stone that have filled your evening hours. Above you the great dome of stars continues its slow peaceful turning. The constellations move in their patient procession across the deep blue cloth of the sky. The Milky Way pours softly from one horizon to the other. The great cliffs of Petra hold their warm stones gently against the cool darkness, and the entire valley seems to breathe with the slow, deep, peaceful rhythm of a sleeping creature whose long, soft exhalations carry upon them the peace of 2,000 patient years of evening hours just like this one. You feel yourself becoming part of that deep, peaceful breathing, your own small, gentle inhalations matching themselves to the slow rhythm of the dreaming city, your own small heart beating in time with the patient pulse of the warm, ancient stones. The night has now wrapped itself fully around the warm, dreaming stones of Petra, and you find yourself growing softer, slower, more peaceful with each gentle breath that you draw. The careful patterns of your busy daytime mind have begun to soften and unspool, releasing themselves like the slow loosening of a tightly wound silken thread, and in their place there is rising, gently, a deep and peaceful drowsiness that feels like the warmest and kindest of old friends. You may close your eyes now, if they have not already closed of their own slow accord, and allow yourself to drift gently into the soft, peaceful currents that carry every weary traveller at last toward the welcoming shores of sleep. The warm stones of Petra remain all around you. Even when your eyes are closed, you can feel them in the deep, dreamy way that one can feel familiar things in the gentle darkness behind one's eyelids. The great rose-red cliffs rise softly on every side, their warm surfaces holding the captured heat of the long day's sun, their patient breath slow and deep in the cool desert night. The carved facades of the Treasury and the royal tombs and the great monastery upon the high plateau stand in their slow, peaceful watch, their softened figures dreaming in the starlight, their cool inner chambers wrapped in the deep silence of 2,000 patient years. The warm flagstones of the colonnaded street stretch in their patient line through the valley. The small water channels run their slow courses along the canyon walls. The great cisterns hold their cool, dark pools beneath the dreaming earth. You may find your slow, drowsy thoughts drifting now through all the gentle scenes of your evening's wandering. The warm light of the marketplace as the lamps were being lit, the soft music of the lyre and the small silver bells of the drum in the lamplit room of our quiet household, The patient hands of the dyer lifting her crimson wools from the steaming kettle, the slow approach of the caravan in the closing hour of the day, each scene drifts softly through your peaceful mind like the warm fragments of a long, gentle dream. And you do not need to hold on to any of them. You do not need to remember them clearly. You may simply allow them to pass through your slow, drowsy thoughts and to fade gently away as new images rise to take their place. The slow, peaceful wind continues its soft drift through the great valley, brushing softly against the warm sandstone, stirring the dry stems of the desert grasses, carrying upon its drowsy currents the deep, sweet scents of the desert night. The stars wheel softly above in their patient, eternal procession, the great dome of heaven turning slowly around its still polar center, the constellations moving in their unhurried dance from east to west, from horizon to horizon, just as they have done for every soft, patient evening across the long, quiet centuries. Breathe in slowly, gently, and feel the cool, peaceful air of the desert night filling your lungs with its soft, mineral sweetness. Breathe out, slowly, completely, and feel the small remaining tensions of your day releasing themselves at last, dissolving softly into the warm darkness, drifting away upon the gentle currents of the night wind. Breathe in again, slowly, deeply, drawing into yourself the patient peace of 2,000 years of Petra's quiet evenings. Breathe out again, more slowly still, releasing now the very last remnants of any thought that does not belong to the warm, drowsy embrace of sleep. The stones are warm beneath you, and the air is cool above you, and the stars are bright in their patient procession across the deep blue dome of the heavens. The great cliffs of Petra hold their slow, peaceful breath all around you, their carved faces dreaming in the silvery starlight, their warm rose stone glowing faintly with the captured memory of the long day's sun. The desert itself stretches outward in every direction beneath the soft, eternal stars, vast and patient and quietly welcoming, and the entire warm world has become a single great, gentle embrace, holding you softly against its peaceful heart. You may notice now that your breath has slowed almost without your noticing, that your shoulders have settled deeper into the soft surface beneath you, that your hands have grown gentle and still, that your face has softened into the peaceful expression of one who is drifting gently toward the welcoming country of sleep. There is no need to resist this drift, no need to stay awake for any reason, no need to do anything at all but allow yourself to be carried softly, gently, peacefully into the deep, restful waters of slumber. The warm stones of Petra are watching over you now, watching with the same patient, gentle care with which they have watched over countless generations of weary travelers across the long centuries of their existence. They have held the dreams of Nabatean merchants and Roman administrators and Christian monks and Bedouin shepherds and the patient archaeologists of the modern age, and now they hold your dreams as well, gathering you softly into the great, slow company of all the dreamers who have ever rested in the warm shelter of their ancient walls. If your thoughts drift away from the desert now, that is perfectly well. If they remain among the warm stones, that is also well. The peaceful images may stay with you, or they may go, may rise, or may fade, may form themselves into the soft, drifting patterns of your evening dreams, or may dissolve gently into the deep, restful darkness of dreamless sleep. There is no right way, no wrong way, no way at all that you must do this. There is only the soft, gentle invitation to rest, to release, to allow yourself to be carried softly towards sleep upon the slow, peaceful currents of the desert night. The stars wheel above, the stones rest below. The wind moves softly, the night holds you gently. And somewhere very far away now, in a place that seems already to belong to the warm country of dreams, the great rose-red cliffs of Petra glow faintly in the silvery starlight, their carved faces watching softly over the long, slow turning of the night. Sleep softly now, dear traveller. Sleep deeply, sleep well. The warm stones of Petra are watching over you, as they have watched over the dreams of countless others across 2,000 peaceful years. The stars above are turning slowly in their patient, eternal procession. The desert is breathing its slow, deep breath all around you and within you, holding you softly against its warm and peaceful heart. You are safe, you are warm, You are held, you are carried softly, gently, peacefully into the deep, restful, welcoming country of sleep. Let go of every thought that is not soft, let go of every weight that you have been carrying. Let go of the day, of the week, of the year, of every busy thing that does not belong here in this warm, peaceful, starlit valley. There is only rest now. There is only the slow, gentle drifting towards sleep. There is only the warm, ancient, patient embrace of Petra at twilight, holding you softly through the long, peaceful hours of the night. Sleep softly. Sleep deeply, sleep well, the warm stones are watching, the stars are turning, the desert breathes its slow, peaceful breath. And you, dear traveller, drift now gently, softly, sweetly into the deep, warm, welcoming country of sleep, where every weary heart finds rest at last beneath the patient stars of the ancient and dreaming world. Good night. Good night. Good night. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.